Hello everyone and welcome to night 2 of the 2021 NAB AFL Draft. Last night we saw 20 players realise their dreams of being drafted to an AFL club, and there will be plenty more excitement and drama tonight here on NAB AFL Draft Night Live as the next batch of hopefuls find out their fate. Back again to help me analyse each and every pick tonight, the draft goat himself, Cal Toomey, fresh off his Phantom Draft success on night 1, and a man who has been very busy on the phones today, Riley Beveridge. Welcome, gents. I'm glad that you both came back.
Yeah, glad to see you too, Nat. There was no doubt about it. We were coming back tonight. We had 20 picks last night. We'll have about 40 or so tonight. So really looking forward to seeing a few of the people who missed out on last night's draft and last night's first round get their opportunity tonight, and then some great stories in the back half of the draft, because they always come, and there's probably more surprises due tonight as well. So we'll see the clubs pick the eyes out of the draft a little bit deeper on.
Love when you get a smoky in the draft. I think we'll see a few tonight, and I love a live trade as well. The invention of live trades and the addition of that in recent years has been huge for the excitement of the night. Spoke to a few clubs today who said expect a lot.
Ooh, I like it. I'm intrigued. Well, we do have around 40 minutes or so until it all resumes here for night 2 of the NAB AFL Draft. Let's take a look, I guess, at the state of play, because between 5:45 p.m. tonight and 6:30, so I believe it's just closed, the clubs were allowed to trade and resume trading picks. Now, we haven't really had any news filter through as yet, but as it stands, the talk was that Freo will retain pick 21, which is the first pick in tonight's draft.
Yeah, at this point, the momentum towards a trade hasn't gone anywhere at this stage, but that doesn't mean that there won't be a potential movement when the actual gates do open again, and that's obviously in about 40 minutes time once clubs are really a lot more assured on who's going to be going where. And that is the difficulty of trading in this part. Although many clubs want to move up, there has to be some communication between the clubs to make sure that if they do move back or slide back 1, 2 or 3 positions, they know that one of the players they want will be there. Now that obviously takes 2 to tango, and sometimes with clubs pushing up the board, they don't always have those open lines of communication. So at this stage, there hasn't been any trades come through in the official system. I've spoken to clubs as well right here about that, and they haven't got any notification either of any trades that have been completed. So after all the talk of the afternoon around Fremantle's pick being up for grabs, Geelong, what are they doing with their couple of picks? Will the Hawks move up? There's all these interested parties. Will the Tigers offload one of their picks in the 20s? What will Carlton do? Could it shape one of its picks and turn it into a couple of picks? Well, so far, no movement on the picks order, but as I say, that will change once the draft kicks off.
And the names that we spoke about late last night that didn't ultimately get picked up, they're the ones that are shaping discussions around trading early on tonight in the 20s. Guys like Blake Howes, a bit of interest from Geelong recently today, whether or not they trade up and try and get him early. Matt Johnson was one that was left on the board. Carlton have interviewed Zach Taylor in recent days, whether or not they think of moving up to get him. These are the names that are in the market. These are the names that clubs are fielding calls over. Josh Goder, another one who's still available, and clubs will definitely come for him.
We had 4 trades go down last night, including obviously Port Adelaide getting pick 12 and West Coast sliding back to 14. But there were a few others, Riley, as well, as we take a look at the round 2 draft order. But what else happened last night in terms of trades?
Yeah, Collingwood traded with North Melbourne after they'd done a deal with the Western Bulldogs earlier in the day. So that secured North Melbourne a couple of picks in the 30s, in addition to their pick 22, which they already started with courtesy of their ladder position. So there were a couple of deals that went through. Notably, they went through after the Western Bulldogs matched that bid on Sam Darcy. One went through beforehand to give them more points. Then another one went through after the Dacos bid happened to ensure they still had the points to match and they could get themselves back into the draft.
All right. Cal, you love the plasma. You've got out of your seat. You're so excited. You're just jumping around the place. Take us through round 2 and the order. What can we expect tonight?
So this is the Fremantle pick that they got in the trade they did with Gold Coast, with the trade period there, with that deal that involved Will Brodie. They got pick 19 as well as part of that. And they were so keen to hold on to that pick during the trade period because Geelong, who were around here, obviously that deal that was going through with Jordan Clark, they wanted this selection so they had the power at the start of the second night to be able to ward off offers or take things on. In the end, the Dockers said, no, we're keeping that pick, we'll give you another one. So this is why they've had the opportunities today to put a price on this pick, a first-round pick potentially to move it. But so far, that hasn't come through. And there's options there for them to take. The local lad in Matt Johnson, and I think Jesse Motlop are what they'd be deciding upon across today. Should they stay there when the picks are drawn in about half an hour? North Melbourne, we know, as Rolly said, bottom of the ladder, so they've kept their spot. And it's really interesting to see what they do. We've all known about their first pick. What are they going to do with their first pick in the second round? Hawthorn have a couple of selections here. So they've got some eyes on different players. They've interviewed Sam Butler a lot. They've interviewed Tyler Sonsie a lot. Blake Howes is in that mix too. Blake Howes could be in the mix here. Now, I'm really interested, guys, to see what the Cats do, because they've got a bevy of options for them. And one of them's Connor McDonald, a midfielder out of the Dandenong Stingrays program. He's coached by Matthew Lloyd at Haileybury College, who's a huge fan of his. He's a hard-at-it midfielder. He's got some love in this part of the draft. North Melbourne, Hawthorn, Geelong, Carlton, all big fans of Connor McDonald. So you'd expect his name to potentially be in this first 10 or so selections. But the Cats, do they play the game where they try and get Toby Conway, who's the ruckman, and we love a ruck story during the draft. Do they try and get him here, where they probably will be able to get him?
Yep.
Or do they try and get him through to their third second-round pick? We know the Cats haven't been in the draft yet, Nat. So Stephen Wells and the team there, Andrew Mackey, Liam Woodland, they'll be working through what their scenarios are for tonight, the Cats. The other danger for Toby Conway could be Carlton. Now, that's a bit of a different one, given it's so difficult to find the rucks. They picked up a ruckman in the mid-season draft, but they've lost some ruckman over the past couple of years, retirement, these types of things. So that might be a watch, and he's a very, very good player, Toby Conway. The Tigers have 3 picks. And this is the hand that's been boosting them. We know last night they were big players. They had 2 first-round picks. They have 3 in a row. So I'm interested to see if one of them slides out or is a target of another club coming in. We know the Bombers, we know Port Adelaide, maybe even St Kilda have been pushing to get some extra picks inside the second round. So could they trade a future pick to bump up and maybe trade out of the Richmond area of the draft as well? This will be really interesting. I expect what this order to look like right here to be very, very different by the time we get to the end of the second round, because we've seen over the past couple of years there's so much movement in this area of the draft.
We know Geelong is one club that would be interested in trading up to 21 for Fremantle. We mentioned before Blake Howes off the top as a potential player they could be targeting. North Melbourne, Hawthorn have interest in him, whether or not they could look to move up. Are there any other clubs that the Dockers have sounded out calls from today that could be interested to move there?
Hawthorn has been interested, so they are certainly one of the clubs that could package up pick 23 and a future second. Is that enough to make the Dockers bounce back? Do they have 3 names on their board that they're really, really happy with, so that they know that if they move back to the Hawthorn pick, one of them will be there? If it's just Motlop and Johnson, well, maybe they wouldn't have as much confidence in moving back there unless you know that North Melbourne won't take one of them. So if Hawthorn move up, you'd have to expect that Matt Johnson to be right in that conversation, because he was in the discussion for their first pick. Now, the other discussion that could come through in the second round is the bidding.
Yes, where are they going to come for Josh Fay and obviously Machito Owens from St Kilda's NGA?
Well, Josh Fay, the Giants Academy player, who's a left footer out of the half back line there, was best on ground, or one of the best players for the NAB AFL Academy earlier this year. I think Carlton's a really good chance to make a bid on Josh Fay. He's a line breaker, and if he gets to that point, that's about where his value would be. The Giants are stocked up on points. They will be fine to match that bid. Machito Owens, he was a storyline coming into it. We expected he would get through to the second night, and he did, and that means that he really now is headed to the Saints. It's just a matter of where that bid comes. I think the Tigers are a good chance to match it or make a bid on Machito Owens. They've called bidman for a reason, Riley. They love to put up their hand and make a bid. The
9
Tigers,
times they've done it.
more than anyone. So they love a bid, and there's a chance that they do it with one of their 3 picks here. The other one, Marcus Windhager from the Saints Next Generation Academy as well. He recently toured the Hawthorn Footy Club. So whether they'd spring a surprise and make some interest in him here, or maybe it's a little bit deeper in the draft, we wait and see. But there's certainly a few Academy boys who are going to find some homes tonight.
Question for you, Cal. If the Hawks do surprise and make a bid at Windhager at 23 or 26, and then a bid comes from perhaps Machito Owens at 28, 29 or 30, are the Saints well stocked to match bids on both, given the amount of points they'll have to have?
Good question.
If they both come that early?
Yeah, they should be fine. And there's some manoeuvring that you can do as well, potentially, to ensure that you can get out of this without too many points issues. They've stacked up on points through the pre-draft trade period, the pick swaps period in the recent weeks. So they've loaded up a little bit there. I expect them to probably take 4 players across the 2 nights. So they obviously picked up the Zai Wanganeen Malira last night. They get Owens and Windhager and then someone out the back. I think it's a pretty good night for the Saints.
All right, we are counting down to night 2 kicking off here at the 2021 NAB AFL Draft. Stay with us on afl.com.au and the AFL Live app. We'll be back right after this.
Every year, I think, Paddy, surely you will be picked as a NAB mini legend.
Zach Tui?
Supporting footballers from NAB AFL Auskick to the big time. NAB, more than money.
If someone had said, here's a contract, you can go and play for any other club, then you'd probably take it.
Well, he is a redhead and he's got steam coming out of those ears.
They were horrendous.
What you've learned is how hard to pressure the opposition into submission.
Well, he said, follow me, son, and I'll teach you how to be a captain.
Shut up, bite your tongue and listen.
Go and tell Hacker, run to the front of Lynchy. If it bleeds, we can kill it.
The stakes could not have been higher.
I was so happy yet so sad. That was a show of emotion from Lee.
Total commitment of 22 men in Brisbane jumpers.
You're watching NAB AFL Draft Night Live. Great to have your company here on night 2 of the 2021 NAB AFL Draft. I've got a little bit of deja vu because we were sitting here at this time waiting for the draft last night to kick off, and of course it was an incredible night. Jason Horne-Francis, the number 1 draft pick taken by North Melbourne, the first time they've had a number 1 pick, and as predicted the bids came early for Sam Darcy and Nick Dacos as well. We also had 4 Joshes drafted inside the first 12 picks, and Neil Erasmus of course becomes the only Neil on an AFL list, and of course then there were the surprises, Cal Toomey.
And we're barracking for Neil to get out there. The last Neil to play was 1998, I think, for West Coast. So we hope that he gets out there this year or next season for the Fremantle Dockers. Yeah, the surprises came thick and fast from 11 through to 20. And we saw a trade between Port Adelaide and West Coast, which saw both of those clubs land their preferred players. Josh Sinn got to Port Adelaide. They jumped in ahead of the Bombers to grab him. The Bombers got Ben Hobbs, one of the sliders of the night, but a really good pickup for their midfield. Campbell Chesser joined the Eagles after they slid back and picked up an extra pick for the future. Lekalia, that was the big surprise, Riley, and also
Interesting.
And also Angus Sheldrick. They are the 2 players that I think clubs last night would have left the draft talking about.
And some players there that I think we thought would go in the first round, but it was a question of where. Guys like Tom Brown, Jacob Van Ruin and Kai Lohmann. And I found it interesting that Richmond were the first to go for Tom Brown, matched him with Josh Gibcus, so 2 defensive players with their first 2 first-round selections. So Jacob Van Ruin, a player from Melbourne who can play either side of the ground. They're well stocked for key position talent on both sides of the footy, so that he's going to be a player that's going to have time to develop his craft at the Ds. Perfect place for him to learn from. And yeah, Kai Lohmann, the big bolter of the night at pick 20 that clubs really like. And I know a lot of clubs early in the second round had him in their sights and were quite disappointed that he got picked up on the first night.
Well, there were some incredible storylines and, of course, moments from last night, night 1 of the NAB AFL Draft. Look at this one, Nick Dacos. I mean, he knew exactly where he was going, but it doesn't make this moment any less special. And he's going to wear his dad's number 35 Guernsey, which is actually a tradition at the Pies anyway, that the first pick in each draft gets to don this jumper. So Nick will get to, I wonder if he'll get to keep it past this year. That's the big question.
I think he wouldn't mind keeping it. There's another great story in Mac Andrew. What a fantastic storyline he's been across this year. Born in Egypt, of South Sudanese background, and becomes the first player of African background to be a top 5 pick in the AFL. So we're really excited to see him go there.
And Josh Ward, of course, a lovely family connection to Hawthorn.
Yeah, his great-grandfather Alex Lee played 31 games for the Hawks in the 1930s. Ever since then, his whole family have been Hawthorn supporters, and he got his dream come true on the big night. He goes to Hawthorn with pick 7.
And can you believe it? Jason Horne-Francis, so exhausted. I know, I was wondering the same thing. He slept in his North Melbourne jumper last night. Look, he's sleeping quite peacefully. Most people sleep with their mouth open,
So
a little bit of gruel hanging out.
He was given a great polo, which we saw on our show, but he ripped it off and wanted to wear the jumper, so he loved
which
it.
we love. At least his jumper fit, because look at Campbell Chesser in an Eagles. It is massive. And look at Xavier Ellis, very cheeky, tweeting there. It was I believe it was an extra large.
I believe so, and there are some... Yes, there are some evidence of the extra large, the barcode that came with that jumper, but that'll go down in history, that jumper. I hope he keeps it, because that's a little memento for the
He should
future.
wear it his first game.
It'd be easy to tackle. It'd be dragging on behind him. Look, he's an exciting player. He's up and about.
Just wear it as a nightie, I say. Now, the best thing about the NAB AFL Draft, of course, is the reaction from the player itself, friends, family, and I can't get enough of it. I don't know about you guys, but I spent the morning scrolling through social media, basically just lapping it all up, drinking it all in. Here's a little snapshot of what took place last night.
Obviously, be something I've dreamt of my whole life, playing for the Western Bulldogs. Yeah, just overwhelming excitement and just grateful to be able to join such a great club.
So no, it's incredibly exciting, and Beck and I are really proud of him that he's created the opportunity for himself, and we are thinking a lot about my dad who would have loved to have seen Sam run out.
Pretty rare thing to have grandpa and father both play for the same club, so yeah, it's definitely pretty proud, and continue the legacy.
Hello?
Is that wouldn't be Darcy Wilmot, would it?
Yeah, it's Darcy Wilmot.
Yeah, this is Chris Fagan here. How are you, mate?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm very excited that we were able to call your name out tonight. We were hoping to get you, mate, and we got you. So we couldn't be happier. You look pretty happy on the TV. Bit of a mob at home there.
Oh, yeah, I'm still like got the shakes still. I'm like cheekbones are sore. This is unreal. This doesn't even feel real.
You have reached mailbox number 04.
He doesn't read the play too well. This boy. Supposed to answer the phone when the coach rings. Kai.
Yep.
Chris Fagan here, mate.
Oh, g'day, Chris. How are you?
I'm going well. How are you?
Oh, I'm bloody. I don't know what to say at the moment. I'm very, very nervous, but obviously thrilled for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
We head back to Gil McLaughlin to do the honour.
Oh, he has put in a lot of hard work, but when he was little, he was a little bugger. He'd have me out on the park and want me to kick to him. And after 2 hours, I'd say, I've got to go in now. And he'd say, no, Nanny, I want to learn.
Melbourne Football Club has selected Jacob.
Pat, how are you? Hey, you too, bro. Congrats, man. Oh, I'm so happy. Stoked for you. Oh, good on you, mate. That's unreal. There you go, bro. Oh, good. How are you, mate? Nice to meet you. Well done. Oh, wow. This is awesome. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Ridge. Nice to meet you, bro. You too. Wow, way. You're on board. Oh, thanks, man. Oh, so happy. I was so bloody crying. I was so happy.
Someone said that. So good.
No, that's amazing, man.
Yeah. So good. Awesome. Thanks for that. Thanks for coming.
Nah, man.
Appreciate it.
Hello, Tom speaking.
G'day, Tom. This is Josh Gibcus.
Oh, Gibbo, how are you, mate?
I'm good. How are you, mate? How you feeling? How you feeling, mate? You got picked up.
Yeah, good. Oh, congrats to you too, fella.
Yeah, I know. It's unreal, mate, isn't it?
Oh, how good is this? This is going to be sick, mate. We've got a lot of hard work, but it'll be good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hard work doesn't start till next week, though. So have a bit of fun. Yeah, definitely looking forward.
Good stuff, right?
Yeah, you too. I'm definitely looking forward to it all, and can't wait to get down with you.
Same.
Yeah. Well, good luck with the rest of your night, mate.
Yeah, cheers, Gibbo. You too. Enjoy it, brother.
Yeah, you too.
You can just feel the chemistry between the two Tigers defenders, can't you?
That was fantastic. Good compilation. Who gets the 3 votes? I think Nanny.
Yeah, Jason
Jennifer.
Hall. Yes, Jennifer. She was fantastic. Nanny, I just want to learn. And lucky, too, that Ben Williams, Jason Horn, Francis's manager, had the AFL app on hand when the TV cut out, because that's the only way he found out he was the #1 draft pick.
Well, we're glad to deliver some good news.
We were. All right. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Hopefully over the next couple of hours we have some more reaction in the same vibe. But we want to take a look now at some of the best prospects who are still available on the draft whiteboard. The clubs have been spending the last 24 hours mulling over these names, deciding who they might select. And the prospect I guess everyone is talking about at the moment is a midfielder from Subiaco, and it's Matthew Johnson, who we thought might go in the first round last night, but he's probably had a very sleepless night, Cal.
Yeah, well, he attended the draft in Perth last night. He was obviously one of 3 players there. Joe Amos got picked up, Neil Erasmus, they both went to Fremantle. Matthew Johnson didn't last night, but he could tonight because the Dockers have the first pick, 191 centimetres. That's part of his weaponry. He's a taller midfielder who uses the ball really, really well, and he's more of an outside midfielder at this point, an uncontested player, but in the future, once he gets his faculties all together as a big, growing, tall midfield option, there's a lot to like about what he can do. He breaks 20 metres in 3 seconds. He jumps really well. Athletically, he's strong. His agility is fantastic for a player his size. And in good games this year, he turned it on. He impressed for Western Australia during the Carnival against South Australia on Grand Final day. At Optus Stadium there. I did watch that game and he was fantastic, just the way he dominated, and he was best of field for WA. So he is a good player, and there's no doubt that a club tonight is going to pick up a pretty nice midfield option.
Can't see him slipping beyond Hawthorn when they do eventually pick. Given the interest in number 7, they were choosing between him and Josh Ward. I can't imagine if he's still there after Freo and North and the Cats pick that Hawks won't pick him up.
Will the Hawks be concerned at all that Freo might jump in or Geelong before them?
Well, they will be, and that's been part of the battle to see if they can get up the board today, and there's no doubt those conversations would have been taking place to see what Fremantle would want and what the Hawks can offer. I don't think Hawthorn should offer a future first-round pick to get this selection tonight, because I think the way things are tracking, you'd probably expect that pick to be around the bottom 4 to 6 next year. I think it'd be a surprise if it was outside of that region of the ladder as the Hawks get through the early stages of this rebuild. So they'd be reluctant to give that one up. And clubs at this point are pretty reluctant to give up future for first-round picks.
Another player the Hawks have done a fair bit of work on is Sam Butler, the younger brother of Dan Butler at St Kilda. They're different players, though.
They are. Sam Butler's a midfield forward option. He's a better progressed player than his brother was at the same age, 184 centimetres, midfield forward. I love his tackling and game sense. His tackling pressure is terrific, and that's what sets him apart from some other smaller forwards within his draft range. He attacks the footy really well. He's smart and creative by foot. Riley, you spoke to him earlier this year. He's a great character as well, and there's a lot to like about him. He had a sternum injury mid-year that ruled him out for a few weeks of Vic Country games, but before that, he had really set the world on fire for the Greater Western Victoria Rebels. So we wait and see where he turns up. The Giants had considered him with their second first-round pick. The irony is he might actually end up at the Tigers. There's some interest there from the Tigers in him. Of course, the club that his brother played in the 2017 Premiership for.
Yeah, spent a bit of time with Richmond when he was in Year 10. Spent a bit of time with the Saints earlier this year under Dan's guidance after they beat West Coast in about round 2 or 3. One of the great characters of the draft. Really funny kid, really likeable kid. A lot of clubs interested in him. Wouldn't be shocked if Carlton had a nibble at him at 27 if he was still there. The Giants, as Cal said, showed a bit of interest last night, but there's heaps of clubs in the early stages of the second round that would look at him.
Now, one draft prospect who will be firmly glued to afl.com.au and the AFL Live app, I'm sure he's got his phone on him right now because he's at his school graduation, and that is Josh Goda, who was hoping like hell he might get drafted last night so that he could actually enjoy his graduation tonight.
Well, there was some interest in him last night. The St Kilda Footy Club, with its first-round pick, considered him for that choice. They ended up going with Nzai Wanganeen-Malira. Essendon looked at him as well. I think he was well and truly in their conversations. And it's easy to see why, because 190 centimetres, he plays off half-back. He can be a runner through the midfield and on the wing. His athleticism is terrific, Riley, for a player who's developing and continuing to grow. He had a good game for Vic Metro at the end of what turned out to be the end of the season in July at Windy Hill against Vic Country. Had 23 touches and 8 clearances and started to get moving there. I think mostly clubs would view him as a half-back option at this point. In the future, though, he thinks he can play in the midfield. Can play across all 3 lines. I'd expect him, if Fremantle does keep its place at pick 21, to be well and truly in their mix. I mean, he's got connections to WA. His dad played Waffle Junior footy for East Perth. He said he's happy to go back there. He's got a lot of family there, so I think he'd be in Fremantle sights.
I'm sure he's hoping that he goes on the second pick of tonight, and that's to North Melbourne. He's grown up a massive Kangaroos fan ever since he was a kid, but he'll watch this, as he said, from his graduation.
The other one with him as well is Carlton. I think that there'd be a really good chance if he's to get through to their pick at pick 27.
Now, Tyler Sonsie is an interesting prospect because we really haven't seen a lot of him over the last 2 years. No footy, NAB League footy in 2020, and then only the 5 games in 2021 with a knee injury.
Yeah, a fascinating prospect. Had some interest last night within the first round, and 2 years ago you would have said this guy's going to be a potential number 1 pick in the 2021 draft. Even at the start of this year, he loomed as a potential top 3 or even top 5 pick. Just didn't get going as much as he would have liked at different stages this year with his injuries that he did face. He suffered some bone bruising in his knee and then an ankle injury more recently, but he has X factor. He has some ability to turn a game. He has the dancing feet out of the middle and get out of trouble and really turn his opponent inside out. There's so much to like about when he's got the footy in his hands, and he's damaging. And we see here the goal sense that he does have. He doesn't take or need too many chances to hurt. So, yeah, he's one to definitely keep an eye on, and he could be a real value pick if he gets to an AFL club and the right environment. There's so much to like about him.
A couple of clubs to be keen on him, Hawthorn being one. Spent some time with Box Hill this year. Had a great game in the VFL for Box the Hill this season. Richmond's the other one that would have had a look at him last night late in the first round when they took Tom Brown. I'd expect him to be well and truly in their mix with those 3 late picks in the 20s.
And he'd be hoping so as well because he is a massive Tigers fan, grew up idolising Trent Cotchin. So imagine being able to play next to him in 2022. Okay, Blake Howes is another interesting prospect. His best mate in Finn Callaghan was drafted last night to the Giants. What do you make of Blake? Where do you think he might end up?
Well, the start of this year, I saw him as a third tall forward. So did everyone. He played a great game earlier this year in Sandringham first game of the season against Oakley. There was a couple of thousand people there. That was a massive junior game of footy, and he was a standout with some of his grabs. And although he wasn't a high possession winner, there was a bit to like about him as a third tall option. He probably dipped a little bit after that, but found his groove in the middle part of the season, and this is where the versatility comes in for a player at 191 centimetres. He found his moment on the wing and started to use his run and carry, and also his marking above his head around the ground. So there's a bit to like about what he can bring, and clubs will view him very differently one to the other. Could we view him off half-back? He probably could do that. Will he start as a half-forward? Well, he's shown that he can do that. He's one of those grabs that day at RESA. And then there's also the midfield capabilities that he does have. So he was one of the top runners in the 2-kilometre time trial, and that's a good effort for someone of his size and shape.
And as Cal mentioned earlier at the Plasma, the clubs at the early parts of this second round are queuing up for him. We know Geelong would be keen potentially to move up. That's been the whisper throughout the day, whether or not North Melbourne, Hawthorn would look at him there as well.
Alrighty, well, last night didn't play out exactly how Matthew Johnson would have hoped, but tonight we do expect him to find his way onto an AFL list. Let's find out a little bit more about this WA midfielder.
Pretty classy midfielder, sort of bit of composure with the ball, and like to bring my teammates into the game when I can. So, yeah, I think sometimes I like to model my game off a bit. Scotty Pendlebury's one. He's like sort of similar dimensions to me, and pretty smooth mover as well. So he's one that I keep an eye on. Yeah, definitely think I'm one of the better athletes for my size in this year's draft. So yeah, it's one of my weapons, and it's something that I'll improve upon further going forward as well. Just using a bit more of my height and put on a bit more weight. So yeah, definitely an advantage of mine. I think probably inside for me is just get my hands on the ball a bit more and yeah, bring my teammates into the game and get the ball out. Either way, I'm just looking forward to the opportunity if I get picked up and just make the most of it. So if that's in WA, it's unreal to stay with my family. But yeah, if I move into state, I think my family's super supportive of me, and my dreams are still playing AFL footy. So wherever I go, I'll take the opportunity.
Well, we have our fingers crossed for Matthew Johnson, another talented player from WA that is on a lot of clubs' wish list is Jesse Motlop. You'll know the name, the son of Daniel Motlop, who obviously played at Port Adelaide and North Melbourne as well. Fun fact, Cal, there has been a Motlop. The AFL hasn't been without a Motlop since 1998.
Well, that is going to continue because he is looking like he's going to be a reasonably early pick tonight. He's been in the mix for Freo's spot. North Melbourne could have a look at him. Geelong as well has shown some interest. Carlton as well. So There's not many pure small forwards like him. He doesn't spend much time up the ground. He's a goal kicker. He's played at league level this year for South Fremantle, including their grand final in the Waffle. So got good experience there. And certainly can, we see the sidestep there, made someone look silly right then, and that won't be the first time, and it certainly won't be the last that he'll do that. So the son of Daniel Motlop, the former Kangaroo and Port Adelaide forward. Of course, Daniel hasn't played enough games, Riley, to be a father-son option for Jesse at either club. But Fremantle, this is the slight irony of it, is that he is a member of Fremantle's Next Generation Academy. However, under Metropolitan Indigenous rules, they don't have access to match a bid for him until pick 40. So the protector zone for them in this scenario lasts to pick 40, whereas last night it ended at pick 20.
And I think recruiters would love to get him to their club, a coach would love to get him to their club, and I think a club's media team would love to get him to their club because he's got a podcast, he does his film work, doesn't he, Cal? You wrote about that earlier this year.
Discussions is his podcast, if you want to check it out.
He's very tech savvy in that area.
Well, I think we might get him on later. Let's just not jinx ourselves if the Zoom call goes okay.
So what, are you expecting then Fremantle, because they obviously know him so well, then to actually have to use a pick to take him?
They could pull the trigger and take him at pick 21. I mean, there'd be a number of other clubs that I think would be willing to have him on their list if Fremantle doesn't go in that direction. I think North Melbourne, as Cal said, would be super keen on him. I think Carlton's been after a small forward for such a long time that they're another club that'd be right in the mix if he does slide through the first couple of picks of tonight's second round.
An academy player next, GWS giant Josh Fay. We spoke about him off the top as well. A booming left foot kick, a little bit of dash off half back, Riley. But interesting because he nearly wasn't eligible, I guess, for the Giants to have first dibs on him because he spent 3 months at the Gold Coast Academy last year.
He did. His family moved up to Queensland for work. He moved obviously with them and spent some time at the Gold Coast Academy. GWS had to lodge an appeal to the, not necessarily an appeal, but an application to the AFL to have him part of their academy once again when he did move back to Canberra this year. That was obviously successful. He spent the majority of his time. I spoke to him midway through the year and he said he feels like a Giant.
Yeah.
He said he feels like that's where he spent the majority of his footy junior career. So he'll go to the Giants tonight. He was best on ground in this academy game down at Geelong. They got absolutely smashed. There weren't too many good players that day, but him and Nick Dacos were the two that did stand out across half-back. Booming kick, as he said, takes the game on with a bit of drive and penetration. He's also a really nice and likeable kid. He's very chatty, he's very energetic in the way he speaks and the way he performs on the field, and I think that reflects throughout the entirety of what he'll bring to the Giants Football Club.
What about a ruck? The pure ruckman, we love him. Toby Conway is one of those at about 204 centimetres.
Just about 204 centimetres. Yeah, he's a monster, and he's a big size already. Got some weight on him, 90 kgs. He can move around the ground. That's what I really like about him as a ruckman, and he's more than adept with the ball in his hands. He helps out his forwards by pushing into attack and being a marking option. He helps out his defenders by pushing into defence and cutting off forward forays from the opposition. He's been dominant in the air and tap-outs. We see some of his work here. And the question now really is, how high does a club take one of the pure ruckmen in the draft? And Mac Andrews already obviously been off the board. He is someone who is a little bit different. He's going to be playing a whole number of roles. Toby Conway's a ruckman. He's always been a ruckman. He's probably always going to be a ruckman. He's a bit he sees himself in the Max Gorn sort of style of ruckman, being able to get around the ground, and we see some of his work here by chopping off, as I said, defensive grabs. The cousin of Paddy McCartan and Tom McCartan as well. So he did have his eye on going to the Swans. That hope was dashed though, wasn't it?
Yeah, when they brought Peter Laddams in through the trade period. Really intelligent kid, completed his studies in Year 12 this year. Worked closely with Brad Ottens, former Geelong ruckman, throughout the year to learn some ruck craft from him. It's interesting, you look at the last day of the trade period, we were here at the desk following that on afl.com.au, and just how many ruckmen moved. It goes to show how difficult it is to recruit a ruckman during this sort of era of football. So the club that gets Toby Conway tonight has got a star for the next 5-10 years.
One last midfielder to take a look at, and that is Connor McDonald from the Dandenong Stingrays. A lot of interest from a few different clubs for this talented youngster.
Yeah, and it's again based on performance and what he did throughout this year. 30 disposal average at NAB League level for the Dandenong Stingrays. He just wins the footy. He can go and get it. He can feed it out. He can get on the outside as well. He's a good size, 184 centimetres. And we saw some of his form as well for Vic Country in this trial game against Vic Metro earlier this year. So Connor McDonald's sample size for under 18 footy was probably a little bit smaller, given he played some school footy at different stages, as we highlighted before, but a reliable option with the ball in his hands, and someone who just, as clubs view what they can become and what players can become, I think there's a really clear path of what you'll see from Connor McDonald as an inside midfield option for them. So they're also enamoured by his character. I think many people just see him, first time they're meeting, tick, no worries, nothing more to assess at this point. So a lot to like about Connor McDonald tonight. And there's some clubs there right at the top of the board tonight. North Melbourne, Geelong, Carlton, Hawthorn have all taken a good look at him.
All right, well, getting drafted is just half the battle. The other half, of course, is finding your feet at AFL level. The draft class of 2020 certainly made their mark this year. Let's check out some of their best moments.
He has 2 goals to his name. This for number 3. Couldn't have kicked it much higher. It's coming back. It's going through. How good's that?
Welcome him back. Here's Andy McGrath. I want to ask Bolts about him in a moment. Just his second possession. He's normally a prolific ball and a beautifully done. Look at the athleticism with Cox. He can go on the non-preferred. 200 centimetres. You can't do that.
Not stopping it at the moment. He's got it going. Jimmy Rowe from the pocket. What a chance he's got here. He's going nuts already. Oh, look at that. He's bursting. Oh, the handball from Walker. He's coughed it off. Baker. Here we go.
Perfect.
Rioli puts it through. And the widest smiling footy.
Over the top of Langford he went. Bouncing ball. Here's Tanner Bruin, the first-year player, bouncing it. Bouncing it. What a brilliant goal from Tanner Bruin.
It's got it to this position. That's how he wants them to play. It's got to hold up in these guns. Gordon on the left. That is enormous.
Still there for Himes. Puts the Jets on. There's that speed. And finally, kicks his first goal in AFL footy.
The Twin Towers, they couldn't quite bring it down. And then the tackle of Marnie. And here is Phillips with a banana. The youngsters are stepping up for the Royals. That's his first goal in AFL football.
He can go underground slightly to Hooker. Gloved it back to McDonald. Now under real pressure. Got it to Perkins. Through a bit of traffic. The right foot Nana. That is just class.
And they're confident about it. Collingwood are. Well, Lynch did really well. Gave it off to Goey. Now McCreary. Don't argue. Goal the Pies.
He's yet to kick a goal in the big time. That'll be a nice moment for him. Lockie Jones. First AFL goal. Well done, young man.
Young man with a big future. The 18-year-old has created something again. Get excited, Hawks fans. Brockman has 2.
To get Collingwood within a point from 30 metres out. It's coming back, coming. He's got it. The young man kicks his first goal.
Big moment.
Fred to Belize.
It's over the top of Franklin McDonald. Wants to swing round on the left. What about that for a finish? What about the excitement about this young man?
Goes Collingwood's way and it's significant advantage, and McRae is going to ride that home. Couldn't hang on to it, so it's North's ball through the middle.
Stevenson running hard.
Jamont puts Lazaro on a path to goal, and his eyes were for the big sticks, and he split them beautifully. Kick on the way, looks nice. That is brilliant. In the last line, Hill. Back himself to get clear. It could be a disaster. It is. And it's Winder. Walker. Won it. Ryder. Important. Ricochets back. Phil Thorpe over his head. Hoping for some magic. He's produced it. The Crows have produced a miracle. Now can they hang on?
You're watching NAB AFL Draft Night live. It's great to have your company. If you're just joining us for the first time, strap yourself in. There's plenty to come. We'll have every pick as it happens live, plus all the interviews you want to hear from these draft prospects. And of course, we have the best and most comprehensive coverage right here because we've got the GOAT, Cal Toomey, who's still, I don't know, floating on cloud 9 after the success of your Phantom draft last night.
Yeah, I mean, it went pretty well, didn't it? We can't
You've
get
been
around
yabbering
that.
on about it all day. Come
No,
on.
I haven't. I haven't needed to. Everyone's been yabbering about it to me. I haven't said anything. I just keep getting calls about it. Look, it was, it panned out quite well, but we wait and see how tonight goes. And there are some players who we thought would go last night who are right in the mix for these early stages of tonight. So that's the beauty of the draft. There is some snakes and ladders to it. And something I wanted to say about the early part of the second round as well is that I think in the first round it's about the layers of the draft, and we talk about the groupings. So clubs pick and they're really happy with the groups. So you might pick at pick 10, you might pick at pick 13, you might pick at pick 16, and you're getting players from your groups. I think when you move into the second round, it's about the individuals, and it's about that club just falling in love with the player and going and getting them. And you can do that maybe a little bit more freely in the second round because you know what's there overnight for a start. And then it's not more about the layers or the groupings. It's actually just about the individuals who are still there on the board. So we'll see a different philosophy and strategy from clubs tonight versus what there was last night, where it was more about which number of a group could be there.
We've also got some father-son selections as well. We had a couple last night, obviously Sam Darcy and Nick Dacos, but there's still three at least, Taj Woden, Jace Burgoyne and Jackson Archer to mention. So they will find their way to their respective clubs, which is exciting news for them.
Well, they're up for bids, so we wait and see if the bids do come for any number of them. I expect Jackson Archer to just join the North Melbourne Footy Club with their last pick, their fifth and final pick tonight. Which will end up obviously deeper into the draft. Taj Woden could attract a bid, and it's obviously up to the Demons then to match it. I still think he'll land there with probably their last selection. And Jace Burgoyne has had some interest from the Bombers, so we wait and see if that one does play out that way. Because he's certainly over a couple of years now shown his capacity as a running half-back / wingman. Spent some time with Port Adelaide Magpies in the SANFL across this year. The son of Peter Burgoyne, whose brother was just recently delisted, but a part of the Port Adelaide Footy Club as well. So such a strong family background there. We wait and see where that bid does come for Jace Burgoyne.
And of course Uncle Sean is now there as well at Port Adelaide. So not too far away from proceedings kicking off on night 2 of the 2021 NAB AFL Draft. Of course, Fremantle at this stage hold pick 21. The first pick tonight. They've got it in their hot little hands, whether they entertain an offer as soon as the clock starts ticking, because I'm sure there'll be a few last-minute phone calls.
Yeah, there will be, but they've had a whole day to work on this now, and you'd think that if it was going to happen, it probably would have been through the pick swaps period just before, unless they're making another club really spend up big to get up and make them sweat on it and give it to last minute. They've set the price, they've set the bar pretty high to move, and that's their right to do that because they're obviously pretty happy with the players they've got. They're in a super position, the Fremantle Dockers tonight, because if they just ignore the offers and they're not happy enough with the offers, then they can take a player that they really like as is.
Yeah, the bit of talk today was that they were asking for a future 1 in return for pick 21 as it currently stands. Whether or not clubs have the ability to do that, there's very few that actually could. If you're a club like North Melbourne, for example, there's no way you're going to do that because you don't know where pick 1, a future first round pick, is going to fall next year. If you're a club like Geelong and you back yourself in to make top 4, the risk of moving from pick 21 to what could be pick 17, 18 next year is pretty low. So you'd rather do that if you're a club like Geelong. There's only a few clubs that can do that. That's why I think they're biding their time now. As we mentioned last night, there's no real point in you accepting the first offer you hear, because there might be a better offer right at the very last second. So they're well within their rights to wait until their full 5 minutes is up.
It's a little bit like trade period, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, we sat here in trade day, the deadline day, and you still wait to see if that final call, someone might blink, and maybe that's going to happen in a trade sense here. But they are on the clock now.
They are. So it's all starting off, and I wonder what they'll do. So if they keep pick 21, which we expect them to do at this point now, who are they taking?
Yeah, I think it's out of Johnson and Motlop. So that's a really tight call for them because they are different players. And Johnson as a midfield option would complement what they've got. And you'd think would give, he'll have the edge potentially over Motlop given his versatility. He might be able to play as a half-back or as a half-forward. In time, he might be able to play on the wing through his foot skills. They've just lost some foot skills through the absence or departure of Adam Chera through the trade period. So I think the option clearly for them as a West Australian either way is really good, and they've clearly gone for a more homegrown bend to what they do tonight and last night. But yeah, I think that those two would be vying it out for this spot.
If you're North Melbourne, Do you want Jesse Motlop? Are you hoping that they take Matt Johnson, Fremantle?
There's probably a couple of players that they don't want to be off the board. Cal mentioned Blake Howes, whether or not it's Connor McDonald, whether or not it's Josh Goda. Who does North Melbourne want in this pick, and who do they want Fremantle to take? It's really interesting. This is where the jostling comes, because it's not just North Melbourne that's going to be querying and worrying about who Fremantle selects should they stay at pick 21. It's Hawthorn, it's Geelong, it's Carlton, it's Richmond, who have picks later in the 20s.
It's everyone.
They're all sort of concerned about who they take, and what Fremantle do here will then dictate what happens at Richmond at 28, 29 and 30, because maybe a player's off the board, maybe they don't have that much incentive to trade up a bit further.
That's right. And what do they need for this year? Do they want just a future pick? Do they want another pick in this year? Fremantle's expected to take 4 picks tonight or across the draft. They obviously had 2 last night, so expected to take 2 tonight to finish that off. One of them might be Eric Benning, a next generation academy player as well, so that could be an option for them later in the piece, or it could be as a Category B option too. So, yeah, I think the weighing up of Johnson versus Motlop, you'd have to think the midfield capabilities of Johnson could give him the edge, because there's so much versatility to what he could do. And then we know North Melbourne has been looking for small forwards at some point of the draft. Do they then bite off Jesse Motlop?
There we go. So Fremantle with the first pick on night 2 of the 2021 NAB AFL Draft have selected Matt Johnson. So finally he makes his way to an AFL club, and he must be very, very relieved. We hope to speak to him very soon, but Fremantle, all local kids, Jai, Amos, Neil Erasmus, and now Matthew Johnson.
And they come out of the draft as a big winner. I think they've nailed it here, and they would have been considering Matt Johnson for one of their first round picks. To get him through to their second round selection is fantastic. And so Johnson, although last night and today would have been a difficult period for him, tonight's his night. He gets his moment to celebrate, and there's been so much eyes and so many clubs looking at him and hoping that he might get him through. So that's a really good pick for the Dockers, and he does bring a wealth of attributes to what they've got.
A few similarities with Dev Robertson, West Australian, who made it through the first round, didn't get picked, and then was the first pick of the second night. So he'll get his chance on an AFL list. I like the 1-2 combo he'll provide with Neil Erasmus in that Fremantle midfield. I don't think you can underestimate just how important it is for them to get 3 West Australians through the doors. We saw Adam Chera leave the club during the trade period. It's obviously an issue for all interstate clubs when boys move away from home. But now they've got 3. They've brought Jordan Clark back to Western Australia. So they've got 4 ready-made, homemade kids that'll come through and play football for them for the next 10 years.
And we know their bold plan, which they went public with just a couple of days ago, to win a flag in the next 4 years. So this is just one step. It's part of their plan. They're building this list under Justin Longmuir. It's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. I'd love to be a fly on the wall right now in North Melbourne and Hawthorn's recruiting rooms, and a bit of scrambling, I think, that might be going on, especially with Hawthorn particularly.
Yeah, and we spoke to Brady Rawlings yesterday on NAB AFL Draft Night Countdown, and he said the Kangaroos would be more than open to potentially trading back if it came to that. I mean, he said the balance would have to be right, and they wouldn't want to trade too far back because they'd still want their player to be available later on. They still have to be confident that their player would be available later on. I wonder who's in their sights here, Cal, because is it Josh Goda? Is it Jesse Motlop? Is it Sam Butler? These are all players that have been linked to them. This is all players that you've written about in your Phantom Draft earlier this week. So this intrigues me, whether or not they slide back or stay like Fremantle have, stick to their guns and take the player they want.
Yeah, Sam Butler, there's points of difference to all of them, isn't there? And they fit a need in different parts. This is the club that came last. So clearly there's depth required in so many areas of that list to help them build up the order. We know Jason Horne-Francis is the number 1 pick. Now they have the second pick on the second night. Sam Butler, Tyler Sonsy's another one that you'd be attracted to the talent. There's no doubt about that. Could they pick him up and spin him through their midfield as a half-forward option where he might start his career? That'd have to be something they'd look at too, because I think they would have been planning today under the scenario that the Dockers would take Johnson, and they probably had a separate scenario of them taking Motlop and what they do there. They have been looking for a small forward though. They've shown interest in small forwards deeper in the draft and a couple of options for them there. So do they just bite it off and fit the need first up, or do they go for someone maybe just a little bit more around the talent level and the best available player, whereas you might use your 3rd and 4th picks to pick out some needs basis players?
There's also been a few links in the last couple of days that this could be where a bid's placed on Machito Owens. as well. That's another one. Rival clubs think that North Melbourne might be a club that could be in the mix there. So there's a few different interesting scenarios that could unfold for the Kangaroos. They could also trade back, as we've spoken about. So we wait and see what they do. Regardless, this is where they start thinking perhaps for need as opposed to best available. They got the best available in Jason Horne-Francis with the first pick.
Yeah, and they do have a number of options there as well because, as we've spoken about, there's a lot of clubs vying for those same names. And I think there is probably a group of those 10 names that we came into tonight looking at them being within the first 12 or so picks tonight.
Well, there you go. Happy graduation to Josh Goda. He has now become a North Melbourne player, the Calder Cannons midfielder. Hope we'll be watching on the AFL Live app. So if you are, Josh, congratulations on being drafted. It'll be a very good celebration tonight.
Yeah, it's a 2-in-1 for him, isn't it? A great moment for him. And another player who was in the mix for last night, he would have hoped that he could have got taken, but hasn't had to wait too long tonight. And the athleticism, the skills, the ball use that he has, there's a lot to like about what he can produce and what he can be. There's only really a version of him at the moment that we're seeing. I think that what the future holds for Josh Goda is up to him because he's got the traits that could see him play some really significant footy at the top level. So Josh Goda from the Calder Cannons, who had some good games for Vic Metro as well. He's a rangy type of player, and they can fit him in a little bit how they want. Do they see him as a halfback? Do they see him as a wingman? Could he even go half forward where his marking could be a skill for them?
I think they see him as a halfback. I think that's where he'll start his career at Arden Street next year as a rebounding defender coming off the half-back line. A massive North Melbourne fan as well. We spoke about the links to Western Australia earlier in the show. And the reason why he's a North Melbourne fan is because his father actually grew up in the same town as Barry Cable, who was a waffle legend, then came over and was a dual North Melbourne premiership player. That's where the love of the Kangaroos started from in the Goda family, and he joins the club he's supported his entire life.
Yeah, it's such a great story. I love these little storylines on draft night. All right, the Hawks are now on the clock.
Just on Josh Goda too. Yesterday at Draft Night Countdown, he and Brady Rawlings had a bit of an impromptu catch-up outside, just outside there as they were waiting. So we wonder if maybe that was the final touch or final piece of the puzzle that the Roos needed just to tick that off.
Very interesting. I like that.
So we can thank Draft Night Countdown for his dreams coming true tonight.
There you go, for more reasons, more than one. All right, about 3 minutes left on the clock now for Hawthorn. So what do? Because we thought, they'd obviously been linked to Matthew Johnson earlier on. They decided to go with Josh Ward. That was the pick that really shaped the draft last night. What do they do here now?
Well, they have some options still. I think Sam Butler's a potential pick for them and would be that forward half pressure player that I think they could use. Tyler Sonzi has the weapons. We've spoken about that a bit, and his game for Box Hill Hawks was one of his better games for the season. Blake Howes strikes me as a bit of a Hawthorn type, to be honest. I think that the ability for him to run and use the footy is really good, and to have that versatility.
That Johnston type nearly when he plays on the wing and goes forward.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. And there's obviously Connor McDonald too, who they've shown some interest in as well. Look, Hawthorn has done more interviews, I think, per capita than any club in the country over the recent weeks. And that's been probably a step up, I think, than previous years. Every club interviews differently, and some might not speak to players for 6 months before they draft them. Ben Hobbs barely spoke to the Bombers this year, but Hawthorn has been out on the road, hitting the track, getting on the Zoom and doing some tours, and that group that we spoke about before, Butler, Sonzi, Howes, even Jesse Motlop, maybe they have a look at those guys in this range.
And the new coach, Sam Mitchell, very much involved, jumping into the interviews as well, and from all reports, even razzing up a few of the draftees. I hope he didn't throw too many curly questions at them.
We love that. That's what Mark McKenzie told us on Draft Night Countdown earlier this week, that the interview process can be a bit boring sometimes, can be a bit dull. They're trying to find little kinks in the players, but Sam Mitchell's come in and spiced it up a little bit, thrown a few curly questions, as you said, so that's always good.
And it's for different reasons too. That's for testing a player's mindset under pressure. It's for testing their resilience, testing them for how they cope with something coming out of the blue and how that would face them. So there are different reasons behind why clubs do that, and often you might read something about why would a club ask, if you
could be a car, what car would you be?
Exactly.
Like Jack Petrocelli?
Or count backwards in nines from 633.
I can't do that.
That'd be difficult in itself, but there's reasons, and it's to test the mind, to put them on the spot and see how they cope.
All right, and Hawthorn with pick 23 have selected Sam Butler from the GWV Rebels. I think he's now the 4th Rebel to be drafted in 2021. And the younger brother of Dan at St Kilda finds his way onto an AFL list.
Yeah, and a really good pick for the Hawks. We spoke about the need for an extra forward half player, and he can play some senior footy next year. I think he's ready to go in a lot of ways. He's got the running capacity. He's got good endurance. He blitzed at the Vic Country NAB AFL Draft Combine earlier this year. Loved a game that I watched him play out at Highgate Recreation Reserve earlier this season, where he just dominated with his ball use. He was quick, he was clever, and didn't waste any of disposals. And I just love the tackle pressure that he's got. So I think he'll add a little bit to what they already have at the Hawks. And as a small player, he should come in and play some footy next year.
And as a small forward, he's not flashy, but he's super effective in everything that he does. As Cal mentioned then, he kicks goals, he wins his own footy, but he also tackles, he puts the pressure on, he's tough as nails. So this is a good pickup for Hawthorn. They're in a position where they needed best available quality, and I think they've got 2 really good players that complement each other well and complement areas that Hawthorn needed fixing in terms of their midfield and their small forward ranks.
All right, this is where it gets interesting because Geelong have 2 picks now. What do they do? And then obviously Hawthorn has another pick after that. It's sort of a giant sandwich there. 2 patties in the middle.
Yeah, that's right. Look, there's some options for the Cats. Clearly the local factor could come into their thinking in Toby Conway. Do they grab the ruckman at this point? Do they go with Mitch Nevitt, who's a 193 centimetre midfielder who was so powerful in so many times this year? A big game, 36 disposals and 10 clearances late in the season for the Falcons, which was an outstanding performance. And also some of his combine testing was really good. So he's one who could come into their thinking here or potentially at their 3rd pick tonight. This, of course, is the Cats' first pick off the draft. This one was their own. Their next one was via their trade they did with the Bulldogs to kick off proceedings on night 1. So there's those guys. There's also Blake Howes, and that would have to be a consideration for them. And Motlop too. They do have a history of the Motlops at the Cattery. Of course, Stephen started his career at the Cats before going to Port Adelaide. So there is the potential for that. They've just picked up Tyson Stengel. Eddie Betts, of course, is going down there to mentor him and also be a development coach. So maybe they look to add to that ranks too.
Connor McDonald, Zach Taylor, these are other players that have been linked there throughout the day. There was, as we spoke about off the top of the show, there was talk all throughout the day that Geelong could be the most likely candidate to trade with Fremantle because they really liked Blake Howes as a prospect. So whether or not, as Cal mentioned there, he could be their man at pick number 24.
Alrighty, well, we have one of the AFL's newest players on board with us now, joining us on NAB AFL Draft Night Live. Josh Goda joins us. Josh, congratulations. Just talk us through what's running through your mind right now.
Yeah, a lot of things. I'm absolutely rapt to land at North Melbourne. Followed them my whole life, so I couldn't think of a better club to land at, and I'm absolutely stoked to get into it with a bunch of boys.
Now, we have to also say happy graduation.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's a bit of a busy night for me tonight.
Will you be going, or where are you at the moment?
Yeah, I'm at home at the moment, so I'll be heading off to graduation in not long now, and I'll go in there and meet my mates in there and graduate.
Are you prepared to wear the North Melbourne jumper under the suit jacket? Is that okay?
It's definitely an option. It's going through my mind at the moment, but we'll have to see, and yeah, it'll be good.
Did you speak to any clubs today, Josh? Obviously, last night you were hoping to get picked up. There was some interest within the first round. It didn't happen. You've had to wait and stew over it for another 24 hours. Did any clubs make contact throughout today?
Yeah, no, I didn't have any contact today, which made it probably a bit longer than it was. And yeah, I was just in contact with my manager, and he kept my head pretty level. So yeah, I was just trying to settle the nerves coming into the night.
Josh, congratulations, mate. We know you're a huge North Melbourne fan growing up. Tell us about your love of Drew Petrie, because I know you idolised him when you were a kid.
Yeah, I loved watching Drew Petrie. He was who'd pull out the most unusual celebrations coming into finals footy. Yeah, so I love watching him kicking goals for the club.
You got to do us a favour, Josh. The first goal you kick at AFL level, give us a Frank the Tank.
I might have to bring it out for him, shouldn't
I? Hey, Josh, on Draft Night Countdown yesterday, you bumped into Brady Rawlings outside here, the studio. Was there any chat around what it'd be like to join the Roos? How's that conversation now you look back on it in hindsight?
Oh, he just came up to me really and shook my hand, and yeah, it was just a little chatter saying good luck and all the best for the night. And yeah, he didn't really let much out that night, but yeah, absolutely wrapped, as I said, to land at North Melbourne.
Well, Josh, congratulations. We're so excited for you. Go and graduate high school.
Thank you. Yeah, it should be good.
Enjoy the night. Josh Goda joining us here on NAB AFL Draft Night Live. Fantastic story. They're a Roos fan through and through. Toby Conway makes his way to Geelong, a pure ruckman, as we mentioned before, the cousin of Tom and Paddy McCartan, and now he is a Catter.
He is a Catter, and they don't draft too many young ruckmen like this, and there's a reason for that, because not many young ruckmen get drafted by many clubs. We saw 7 drafted in the mid-season rookie draft, but you take the best when you get an opportunity to grab them, and maybe in the future we'll look back on this one like we do Brodie Grundy, pick 18, or Tim English, pick 19. Maybe in the future we'll say, how did Toby Conway get to pick 24? Well, he did that because there's been some good players ahead of him, but he's also a big ruckman, 205 centimetres. He has a lot of makings that we'll see him become a really good ruckman at the top level. Not to mention the fact that, as you said, Rolly, a really studious sort of character as well, who prides himself on hard work on and off the ground. So a really good pickup for the Cats. He'll be given time to develop there, and we like to see a young ruck taken in the top 30. There's still room for it.
Reece Stanley, John Segler there at the Cats now. So as Cal said, he'll have room to develop. They drafted Shannon Neal last year as well. So.
All right, so Toby Conway was the first pick Geelong have had in this year's NAB AFL draft, and with their second pick 25, they've taken Mitch Nevitt, another Geelong Falcons boy.
Yeah, they've gone local. They've stretched out about 2 kilometres, I think, to do their recruiting this year. And look, these guys are...
Get in your car.
No, these guys are absolutely valuable and worthy of these selections. I'm a big fan of Mitch Nevitt. I think there was clubs looking at him around this mark who would have really looked at whether to bring in this 193 centimetre midfield option. How rare is it to find a midfielder that size these days? And when you find the good ones, how valuable are they? So we know the Patrick Cripps midfield option. We know Marcus Bontempelli. I'm not saying he's these guys just yet, but there's a lot to work with there, and there's upside. There's bits and pieces to his game that still need some development. But
all through, do they go with a more pure midfielder after snagging Sam Butler earlier in the night?
I mean, do you think Tyler Sonsie is too good an option to overlook, given that he could have been a top 5 draft pick had he potentially played more footy in the last 2 years?
Yeah, we just didn't see him probably do it all with the consistency that other clubs would have liked to have. And there's still, he's got room for improvement with his running, and that'll come when he gets to the top level. But the innate ability that he does have around the ball makes him a dangerous player. So he'll find a home pretty soon. I've got no doubt about that. But there certainly is clubs that will be interested in maybe even moving up and looking at him. West Coast showed some interest in him recently too. Would they take a look at him when they enter the draft shortly? Because that was probably never going to be for their first selection, but now all of a sudden he's there a little bit later. I just think the Geelong picks are really interesting in the way they've gone about it, because they had the option potentially to take the gamble, take the risk, and see if Toby Conway would get through to their third pick. In the end, they just said, you know what, stuff it, we're taking him because he's too good to pass up.
And I rate that from clubs when they do that. They back their man in. We saw it a couple of times last night with maybe West Coast with Campbell Chesser. They managed to trade down a few picks, but they probably could have traded a bit further, but they just said, he's our man. So I like that from them, and depending on what the Hawks do here, on what the Cats do here, you'd like it from them.
And then, of course, we have Carlton next with their very first pick of the draft, as Hawthorn with pick number 26 take Connor McDonald from the Dandenong Stingrays. So they've gone that way, a reliable and consistent inside midfielder.
There really hasn't been too many surprises as yet tonight, but this is a really strong group of players and guys who did have some interest within the first round. Connor McDonald becomes a Hawk. They'd shown interest in him over a number of times throughout these last recent weeks, and they probably bite him off just before Carlton get into the draft, because Carlton certainly were interested in him. I think he was probably their man from a bit of a way out. So that will be interesting to see what the Blues do next. Look, Connor McDonald will step into a footy club, and I reckon after one training session, every player at that footy club will be raving about how good a bloke Connor McDonald is. So that's just something to keep in mind as supporters out there for the Hawthorn Football Club. I think you'll come to know and love Connor McDonald as a character, and his work ethic as a player will be really beneficial too.
We mentioned they would have had Matt Johnson top of their list going into the night. They didn't get a pure out-and-out midfielder with their first pick of the second night. That was Sam Butler. They've got one now in Connor McDonald. A club recruiter described Connor McDonald to me earlier this week as the type of player where you won't have his number on the back of your jumper, but he'll do the job every single week for the rest of his career. So he's that reliable figure that this is what builds premiership teams from the start, because they do their job week in, week out. They're a role player. Richmond won 3 flags in 4 years as a result of role players. It's interesting. I think Carlton would have taken him with the next pick, so it will change what they do.
Yeah, what do you think?
Almost certain they'll take Jesse Motlop here.
Okay.
I think this is where he gets picks. The Blues have tracked him for a long time. They like what he's able to produce as a pure small forward. Their need for a small forward's gone as far back as when they missed out on Tom Papley in 2019. I think this is their chance now, and their first chance to get a real full-time small forward into their footy club.
And they've done exactly that, Riley Beveridge. You are on the money tonight. They have taken Jesse Motlop with pick 27 in this year's NAB AFL Draft. I was just going to ask you if they'd even consider a key defender given Liam Jones's retirement, but they've gone with Jesse Motlop, and that is an outstanding selection.
It is, and they'll be rapt to grab him. And there were some interested clubs inside the early part of the 20s for Jesse Motlop. Fremantle had a look with its first pick tonight. North Melbourne had another look as well. I think Hawthorn would have taken a bit of a glimpse at Jesse Motlop. In the end, he gets through to the Blues. As Riley said, they've been looking at small forward options. Zach Taylor was another one they've looked at. They've had a bit of a glance at Sam Butler. He was off the table. Jesse Motlop, he's got footy in his blood. He's a very impressive character himself, and hopefully we'll get him on for a bit of a chat soon because he's a bubbly personality, and that comes through in his footy too. So, yeah, there's a lot to like about him. He's a small forward. He's 177 centimetres, so he's got some pace. He's not the type of small forward that will absolutely chase down other players with electrifying speed, but he is really classy with the footy in his hands.
The way clubs described Jesse Motlop to me was that he's the type of player that his mind is what gets him that split second ahead. You see some players do it through leg speed as a small forward. His footy IQ makes him that split second ahead of the play. That's the type of small forward that he is. Carlton have tried so many players as small forwards in the last couple of years. Zach Fisher, these types. Corey Durden they drafted last year and tried him for a few games late last season. This is a player now that can potentially play senior footy next year as that smaller option in attack. And
has spent a lot of time on YouTube watching his dad's highlights reel. So I'm sure
Pretty good highlights reel. It is a pretty good highlights reel. So a little bit to get up to and reach those levels for Jesse's. He's a different player to Stephen, but as you say, Nat, good to have another Motlop in the footy pedigree and footy family again.
It certainly is. Now, Richmond, 3 picks here in a row. I wonder if they might trade one out. Probably not this first one.
I think we'll see a bid. I reckon we'll see a bid pretty soon. It could be Josh Fay.
How much do you want to put on that?
We'll bid on a
with
bid.
One of the bids.
Yeah, can we bid on a bid?
I think there'll be a Josh Fay, Mitch Owens, one of those guys are likely to get a bid around this mark. And Richmond have 3 selections. At this point, they really do start to be, if they get past these points, I think St Kilda and the Giants respectively will be pretty happy if that happens for their academy kids. Look, the options for the Tigers, Blake Howes, Tyler Sonzi, Rhett Bazzo, Zach Taylor. These are some guys who could come into things at that point. Arlo Draper, could they come into the mix for the Tigers? All of these players, look, they've picked up a key back with their first pick.
Yep.
They picked up a half back with their second pick.
They're set in defence, you'd think.
Yeah, I think so. And now maybe they shape what their midfield could look like. They obviously surpassed a gun midfielder to take Josh Gibcus with their first pick in Ben Hobbs. And Neil Erasmus, and then at 15, or what turned out to be 17, they had some other options there, but they chose Tom Brown. So there's some groupings there of players that are pretty even, but will all have their different strengths and reliabilities.
And Tyler Sonzi will be sitting there hoping like hell that he might get his name called out at one of these 3 picks, given he's grown up a massive Tigers fan and idolises Trent Cotchin. So that would be a dream come true.
The other moment that could happen here is that, as you said, Nat, a club could really push up the board and say, well, Richmond's a little bit, not susceptible, but open to a trade back or a trade out of one of these selections if they maybe are a club that could be potentially in the lower part of the second round next year or the lower part of the ladder. An early second round pick could be in that mix.
All right, we wait and see what the Tigers do. They've got about a minute left on the clock.
For all the talk about live trades.
Yeah, I know. Nothing has happened. Come on, give us something, recruiters.
I think the issue is I'm just speaking to a couple of clubs. No one wants to trade back.
Okay.
Because they're actually really happy with this group of 10 or 12 players that slipped out of the first night. So no club have actually wanted to be out of the this area of the draft. And as we say, we've been able to pick the names basically that were going to come through at this point. And here we see Tyler Sonsie get his opportunity, and
What a great story.
He'll be a rapt young man to get to the club that he barracked for as a kid and has supported for so long. He's got some really exciting traits. There's going to be some Tiger fans pretty excited to see Tyler Sonsie out there. I was out at this game earlier this year, Riley, and he just turned around and did some magnificent things. He flashes in and out of games, but he can still end up with 23 touches and a couple of goals, which he did earlier this year. His game for the Box Hill Hawks, he had 22 touches and kicked a goal and played really well. And there's some moments, as we see, there's just the footy smarts and nous that he does have. So I was hoping a club would trade up and grab Tyler Sonsie, so then I could say it was the Sonsie scheme to go and get him, because I've been sitting on that one all year.
And you haven't been able to use it.
All year I've been trying to do that.
No.
But it didn't happen, so I just had to use it anyway. But it's...
Well, I'm glad you got it out.
Just crowbar that into the conversation.
The gags you've got all year.
There's a couple lined up for later. Look, he's a good pick for them, and they're in a position where they can really bank on the talent that he has at his disposal.
I think it goes to show the midfield depth of this year's draft class as well, that Tyler Sonsie can make his way through to pick 28. Richmond would have been considering Ben Hobbs, Matt Johnson. They would have loved for Josh Ward to fall through to that first pick. Didn't get any of them. Took Josh Gibkes, backed it up with Tom Brown as that secondary defender with a second first-round pick. They get their midfield depth now. I think this is where they start building out their midfield depth with these 3 picks. Tyler Sonsie's the first of them.
All right, it's time now to speak to another new AFL recruit, and it is Sam Butler, who made his way to Hawthorn probably about 15 minutes ago, and he's been good enough to join us on Zoom. Sam, congratulations on being drafted. Did the Hawks give you any inkling, I guess, in the last 24 hours?
Nah, to be honest, I think my last meeting with them was about probably last week, but no inclination or anything like that. But so happy to be there, and can't wait.
Now, talk us through who was with you the moment your name was read out. Was your brother with you, family? Just talk us through the reaction.
So I had all my family, my nan, my 2 brothers, mum, dad, and then one of my cousins, and now all my friends and everyone are over. Everyone's coming over, and it's hard to tell what's going on, but I'm getting that many calls and text messages and everything, so it's great.
Your phone's blowing up.
Hey, Sam, how many times did Hawthorn interview you overall?
About three, I think, yeah.
So you got to know him pretty well. Was Sam Mitchell as a part of those chats? And if so, how was that?
Nah, he wasn't a part of any. I think he missed one of the Zoom calls, but I just spoke to him on the phone, and he seemed like a legend, and I can't wait to be coached by him.
Sam, you spent some time at St Kilda as a kid. You spent some time at Richmond as a kid with your older brother Dan. What's it going to be like walking through the doors at Hawthorn next year?
Probably a bit different. I've had a bit of experience at all different clubs. So I did go to Hawks last week, and I checked out all their facilities, and they get new facilities in the next couple of years as well. But it is a lot different. But I've probably said before, I can't wait to, tackle Daniel and get into him a bit.
And the Tigers made you wash towels when you were training with them a couple of years ago. I'm sure you won't be doing that anymore.
Oh, I bloody hope not.
Just before we let you go, Sam, has your brother Dan given you any advice as you embark on this new chapter?
Probably the main thing is just to work hard and just be determined to take it to the next level. I think that's the main thing, just work hard and I suppose just make new friendships and relationships and be willing to learn.
I love it. Well, Sam, congratulations once again on becoming a Hawk. We can't wait to see what you might produce in 2022.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Sam Butler
Got
there.
some phone calls to answer.
I think so. His phone was just blowing up. It was going berserk. All right. In the meantime, Richmond are still on the clock. They have 2 more picks. They've got 3 in a row. They've taken 2 defenders already last night in Josh Gibkes, and the other one escaped. Tom Brown, thank you very much. They've taken Tyler Sonsie, a lifelong Richmond fan. I wonder what they do next.
Well, there's options for them, as we've spoken about. Do they go another defender? Do they do a wingman? Do they do a midfield option? In the end, they've gone with Sam Banks, who did have some interest inside the 30s. This is maybe the starting point of his range from Tasmania. a great character as well. Clubs are really fond of his character off half-back. And he plays with real skill. We haven't probably seen the best of him this year because of injury. He hurt his wrist earlier this year, an injury that did bug him across the season and probably curtailed his impact. But he started the year as one of these highly rated players as a part of the NAB AFL Academy. He's a great kicker and user of the footy. We see how damaging and penetrating he can be. So they obviously identified his run and carry as a trait for them. I think they've been looking for some extra run as well. They bring him in alongside Tom Brown, both players who can provide rebound off half-back. Banks could potentially play in a wing going forward.
Okay.
So there hasn't been as much chat around him, but there certainly was some interest in him in the 30s mark of the draft.
I like the fact they've brought in a bit of midfield class, and they've done that with their last 2 picks in Tyler Sonsie and now Sam Banks. These players that can get on the outside and deliver it forward half really nicely by foot, can also take the game on with their leg speed as well. So I like what Richmond's managed to do. This is what we said. They'd build out their midfield now. They strengthen up their back line last night with their first couple of picks. Now is where they see the midfield depth on the board. Now is where they can start to build out that midfield long term.
So it begs the question with their last pick here in this little trio, do they bid on a player? Is this where you're thinking they might actually do that?
They could bid here on Faye or Owens. They could also look to trade it out. I think clubs would be knocking on the door or texting around or getting on the phone to Blair Hartley, the Richmond list manager, and Matt Clark, the recruiting manager there, and saying, what do you want for it? Was a player that we might like. Blake Howes is still there, so that might be a target for clubs to say, well, could we push up the order and grab him because he's still there on the board. Zach Taylor's another one who clubs might be hoping just gets through to the early 30s. Do they actually just make sure of it? We've seen this part of the draft in previous years have so many trades. I'm a little bit surprised that we haven't seen any of them come through after all the discussions that were put on today. But as we said, there has been that really strong group of prospects that have managed to get through this next 10 picks or this first 10 picks tonight. And that's why we will see so many clubs knock back offers to move. I
mean, we mentioned the fact that they've strengthened their back line, now a couple of midfielders. Do they maybe look at getting in a forward?
They could. I think there's some real interest in, I'm just getting some chats with clubs. I think there's some real interest in what they can do with this picker and how it could be on the market. So that's, I think, a bit of a watch over the next couple of minutes. I think there's other clubs as well. You think about the clubs that are keen to throw in a future second round pick to get another pick in this year's draft, whether that's St Kilda. Could they use a future pick to get in ahead of the bid for Mitch Owens and Marcus Windhager? So then you actually end up with 4 really high-quality players at the top end of the draft. The Bombers have been throwing around their future second-round pick. What could they do to maybe bite into this part of the draft and come away with a nice player? Because Blake Howes, remember the Bombers were interested in him in their first pick. They interviewed him recently, even only a couple of days ago. They should be the ones calling Richmond now and saying, well, knock, knock, knock. We want this guy. We liked him.
Come on, Adrian.
We liked him at pick 11. Can we do that and see if we can get him now? Because that's the art of it. And maybe you pay a little bit more than you might otherwise want to, but you get the player you want.
Does Adrian Dodoro make the phone calls, do you reckon, Riley?
He makes the phone calls.
Has to, surely.
He makes the calls.
I also look at the clubs with picks immediately after this who wanted players early in that range. So I look at Geelong at 32, Sydney at 33, Adelaide at 35. They're players that have been linked to Zach Taylor in the past, potentially even looked at him last night in the first round of the draft. Whether or not they think the temptation's now too big, do we have to move up and ensure that we can get him with our pick?
All right, well, we look and wait to see what is happening here at the moment with Richmond and their third pick in a row. Tyler Sonsie and Sam Banks, as we mentioned, they have taken to sort of bolster that midfield, although Sam Banks can also play in defence as well. And off the back of last night, Josh Gibkiss and Tom Brown. I mean, you think about the Tigers, obviously missed finals, but
they could rebound really quickly.
They can, can't they?
And they've added Judson Clark with their third pick.
Speed.
So I'm certain that the offers were coming in for this pick. In the end, they've backed in the player and the talent that they have at their disposal, and that's Judson Clark. A little bit of Zach Fisher about the way he plays off half forward. He's a really sharp goal-kicking option. We see the speed and the burn him off, take him on speed that he had at his disposal here. He is crafty. It was actually at this game that he dominated down at Frankston earlier this year, playing a little bit more through the midfield on a Saturday night down there, and we see the finishing skills that he does have. And it's the finish that sets him apart as a player. For Vic Country, he kicked 5 goals earlier this year in a game that really stood out at Werribee, and he has put himself on the draft map as a potential top 30 pick, and he's basically vindicated that tonight by being number 30. There was clubs looking at him in the next batch of selections, I think. I reckon Melbourne would have taken a look at him too, but in the end they've gone a kicker, and it's a really strong group of prospects. In the end they've picked up, what have we got, 4 Victorians and a Tasmanian, and a really homegrown group.
They've also strengthened across all 3 lines, as you
which
mentioned.
is brilliant.
So they get their 2 defenders last night, they get their 2 midfielders early today, and now they pick up their forward as well. So I think if you're a Tigers fan, you're probably sitting at home thinking, how long until we get back into the finals, until we start challenging for premierships again? I don't think it's going to be too long because of the fact they've managed to replenish their list really well. So even when players like Trent Koch and Dustin Martin start coming to the end of their careers, they've always held first-round picks. They've brought in Riley Cooley-Dawkins, Thompson Dowd the last few years. Jack Higgins, I know they've traded him out, but they still kept that pick after they won the flag. And now they've got 5 picks inside 30 tonight.
Yeah.
And taken 5 really good players.
They've got a pick left in the 80s. Do they take that one? Do they use that? Or
No, I don't
they're
think
just
so.
probably going to be done
I think
from
that'll
here?
be them done from here.
Well, geez, they've done really, really well. West Coast, here we go. Pick 31, Brady Howe.
Yeah, Brady has done a great job to put himself on the map throughout this year. Look, there's so many clubs that were interested in Hoff across this season. It was the work that he put together as a midfielder late in the year that really put him on the map for clubs, and he worked his way into contention for a number of clubs inside the top 40. I think Collingwood was another club that was interested, somewhere in the 30s, depending on where their bid came for Nick Dacos. In the end, the Eagles have snapped him up and gone with a local talent. So there's a lot of interest in Brady Hoff and what he was able to do, as I say, put himself on the radar of clubs in the past sort of 8 to 10 weeks of the season at Colts level in the waffle, and yeah, there's someone that I think deserves his shot at this point of the draft.
The Hoff. They brought in Campbell Chesser last night, a halfback that takes the game on. They need to strengthen their midfield depth. I think they need quality across the board. So this is another addition there that's just going to be someone that can go into their midfield in the next few years, really solidify that area of the ground for them. 2 really nice picks to start the night for West Coast.
And club's nervous. Where's all the trades?
I know. I don't know what's going on, but hopefully the West Coast Eagles have a better fitting jumper for Brady to put on when he does his Instagram post. That's the all-important one.
You'd hope that being in Perth would probably help for that, and clearly he might have some more options at his disposal if he goes down to the club in the coming days. But yeah, with Brady Hoff through the midfield and Campbell Chesser, an athletic potential midfielder, I think that's probably the view that the Eagles will take with Chesser too in the future. He's that athletic runner through the wing who can burst the line and kick the ball 60 metres. There's a couple of real potential stars for them.
And my apologies to Brady for mispronouncing his last name.
There's a lot of names out there.
Forever be known as the Hoff. Now I've just got images of Baywatch in my head. So let's get back to the draft because Geelong is on the clock with pick 32. They've had a couple of selections already tonight, taking Toby Conway, just a pure ruckman, 205 centimetres tall, and Mitch Nevitt. They've gone Geelong Falcons, so both of those picks, do they look outside the local radius here?
This is where I think you might start getting into Zach Taylor territory. I think the next 3 clubs, I reckon Geelong and Adelaide have been linked to him for a long time. And the Swans were linked to him with their first round pick where they took Angus Sheldrick.
James Willis, okay.
James Willis, that's a bit of a surprise.
Yeah, he had some interest from the Tigers just a few picks ago, so I thought he could have been on the radar at that point. But in the end, he's gotten through. He's a bull at the midfield stoppages. There's so much power and exuberance within his midfield work, and you just see him get out of trouble with the footy in his hands. So he sort of burst onto the scene a little bit later than other clubs or players would have expected, but he does have some real explosiveness within his arsenal, and that's something that he can take to an AFL club as well. He'll have some ready-to-go traits about him, and look, it's hard to break into the Geelong midfield, Riley. There's a fair few players in there, but with his work ethic and also his just more mature frame, he's a step ahead of some others.
Well, you mentioned that he's a bull. They've managed to bring in 2 of them because Mitch Nevitt is a very explosive player as well, a taller player. They're beefing up their midfield group really strongly. We mentioned the ages of their midfield group that's currently at the club. This is the next generation for the Cats now. Everyone questions where's Geelong's youth, where's it coming from? These are the players that they'll see in 5-6 years' time that'll be taking over the likes of Selwood, Dangerfield, Guthrie, Menegola, Duncan. These are the players that they'll hope will be able to bring this club back into the fold in about 4 or 5 years' time.
Well, at pick 28, Richmond selected Tyler Sonsie, and I can only imagine it was a childhood dream realised for him. He's been good enough to join us here on NAB AFL Draft Night Live. Tyler, congratulations. You've grown up a Richmond supporter. How is it feeling right now to be a Tiger?
Yeah, my heart's pumping. I'm just over the moon, lost for words, really.
Oh, we just lost you a little bit there with the connection. We'll see if this works. Again, you grew up idolising Trent Cotchin. Can you imagine what it's going to be like to actually meet him and play alongside him?
Yeah, it's going to be an unreal experience. Like, I've been looking forward to it my whole life, and it's just come true, really.
Tyler, congratulations. It's Cal Toomey. You've had to go through last night's first night of the draft where you're a chance for a couple of clubs. How was last night as you woke up this morning, and did you get much sleep overnight?
Yeah, didn't get too much sleep overnight. Bit of a weird night. Half a chance last night, but like I'm over the moon. I couldn't be any more grateful right now.
Who's the player you're looking forward to partnering up with at Punt Road as soon as you get down there?
Oh, I couldn't even name one. There's too many, to be honest.
Have you gone to any of the grand finals, or what's your favourite Richmond memory? Because I imagine being a Richmond supporter in recent years has been a bit of a fun ride.
Yeah, I went to the 2017 one, and yeah, like, feeling how it was now, I was over the moon.
When you look back at your year, Tyler, how do you think you went? Because there's obviously injury issues that you battle with your knee and more recently your ankle, but you did play some really exciting footy within there as well. Is it a little bit of a shame that you weren't able to get out there a little bit more across the season?
Yeah, it was obviously a shame. Like, obviously with the knee injury, it was very disappointing. Like, wanted to just get out there. Really haven't played footy in 2 years. Like, sure the same with every other kid. Just want to play footy. So yeah, it was a bit flat.
Has anyone from the Tigers given you a bell? Maybe the coach, perhaps, in the last few minutes?
I think the coach in Las Vegas. So a few players texted me and called me. But yeah.
Well, I'm sure there'll be a call very, very soon. Tyler, congratulations on being drafted to the Tigers. We can't wait to see your footy future unfold.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Best of luck. Tyler Sonsie there.
Well, I hope Dim is tuning in from
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas.
I'm sure he is. AFL.com.au.
Worldwide.
So while that was all happening, Sydney have made a bid. The first bid of the night, we thought the Tigers might do it, but the Swans have jumped in there, and it's Machito Owens, the St Kilda Next Generation Academy player that they have bid on. I mean, Saints fans were stressing out. They were losing their mind thinking that a bid might come in the top 20, meaning that the Saints wouldn't be able to match it. But in this case, at pick 33, they can certainly do so.
And he was on the verge of being bid on by the Saints or being bid on by the Swans in the top 20. Of course, then they would have had full access to them. It wouldn't have even been a bid. They could have just taken him and grabbed him and taken him up to the Harbour City. In the end, they had some other options in front of him. They took Angus Sheldrick last night, and now the Saints get their man in Machito Owens. So a great story, really, across this season. I'm not sure if he would have been pick 33 at this year's draft had he not played for Vic Metro as a late call-up mid-year. He had 29 touches and dominated in a game that he was an emergency for. In this game here, we see the left foot snap, curls through. Look, he's a hard-working play roller. He's 191 centimetres nearly and can get around the ground with a work ethic that's, you know, unmatched by many players. His form across this season just developed and developed and developed, and he can read the game pretty well. So he's got some maybe potential growing to go. His brother Kai's a part of the Frankston Footy Club. He's 193 centimetres, so maybe we see him get up a couple more, but a good get for the St Kilda Footy Club, part of their next generation academy line.
And that size has been something that's come late. I think he's grown 10, 12 centimetres over the last 18 months. So he's always a small, zippy, ground level player. And all of a sudden he's taller than everyone as well. He's a really mercurial talent. There was a highlight there of him backing back into a pack and taking a mark over his head. That's what I love about him. He can play as a mercurial talent inside 50. Watching him, it's really hard to compare him to a player because he can play at any part of the ground at all. So St Kilda's got a really nice player that'll fit in so many areas of their side over the next 10 years.
And Marcus Windhager is their other Next Generation Academy member. Do you expect a bid for him to come, or do you think St Kilda will just end up picking him up?
I think a bid will come for him in likely the next 10 or so selections. Of course, he's nursing a back injury at the moment that I think would have meant that clubs probably wouldn't have taken that on, knowing that it might lead to a lengthy layoff in his first season. There's still some management of that to go and some decisions to be made on how that's best treated in coming weeks and months. But that'll probably see a big come for him a little bit later in the piece, and that's okay. That's probably in many ways a good result for St Kilda in terms of their bidding. Clearly they wouldn't want him to be getting to the club with an injury, but to get both of these guys on board alongside Nazai Wanganeen Malira is a fantastic result, and we should see that come to fruition pretty soon. Still no trades tonight.
Still nothing. We want some trade action. Come on, guys.
Is this where Blake Howes goes, Cal? I mean, he's still on the board. Sydney would have looked at him with their late first-round pick.
Yeah.
Sheldrick instead.
Yeah,
so.
they had some interest in Zach Taylor as well, potentially at this point. I wonder if taking Sheldrick could change whether they take Taylor too. Similar size. Last year they grabbed Errol Goulden, who's a similar size to those guys, and Braden Campbell, who's another player who's not a big bodied or taller type.
Whereas
so
Blake Howes is.
yeah, well, so that's the thing. I mean, Blake Howes is a point of difference. I wonder if they also would make another bid. Could they double bid and go for Josh Fay, another player?
Love a double bid.
A double bid would be interesting.
We've not had one of those before, have we?
We have.
I think the Bombers made a couple last year. The Bombers and maybe
Carlton did 2 first rounders, top 10.
They did too.
Tom Green and Liam Henry.
Yep.
There was the bid time a couple of years
15
ago.
minutes up there, Sleeve.
Did they look at it all in Rep Bazzo? There's a couple of Jake Saligo, a midfield option who's I thought would be around this part of the draft.
You had him about 30, I think, in the Phantom.
Yeah, so there's some clubs at this point that will be looking at him. Do they look at Hugh Jackson, who's a running option for them?
Not Hugh Jackman.
Not Hugh Jackman, Hugh Jackson. There is a bit of a difference. Cooper Hamilton is a midfielder from half-back, so there's some options there for them. And look, this is where we're starting to get into that next phase of the draft now, because the 10 or so players that we thought were going to be taken are all but taken, apart from probably Blake Howes. And then we move into the next period where it's a go your own way type of affair, because I think clubs think that mainly they might get picked off 1 or 2 before, but once you start to get close to pick 40 of the draft, you generally get the player you want, because your list varies so much across the competition. So we wait and see what Sydney does with, what have we got left? Probably about a minute or so on the clock.
Taking the time, they would have had 10 minutes to think this
Yeah, I know. And 5 picks left in this second round before we move on to the third round as well. So Sydney, then Adelaide, West Coast, North Melbourne, and then Melbourne on the clock. Melbourne for the first time tonight, obviously. Last night, they took Jacob Van Rooyen, the swingman of this year's draft as well. So we look to see what Sydney might do here with about a minute left on the clock. And maybe they're just buying some time. That bid was there just to give them a little bit more extra time to see what they might come up with. Maybe there's a fair bit of shuffling going on.
Would they be fielding calls here as well, do you think, Kel?
Potentially, or they just make the call. I think it's too good a pick now if they have made a decision. They've gone with Matt Roberts, who's a member of the South Adelaide Footy Club, who obviously produced the #1 pick on Wednesday night in Jason Horne-Francis. He's been a long-term teammate of his, a member of the NAB AFL Academy, player through the midfield there. He's played at different spots this year. He's played at different levels. He's played a lot of games. That's no doubt about that. He's come back early, probably from an ankle injury to be...
Syndesmosis, wasn't it?
Yep, and come back and played some footy for South Adelaide and also for South Australia. Look, he's a workhorse around the ground. He's got that left foot. He can find the ball. He's been on the radar for a couple of seasons now, so I think some clubs probably had him tipped to be maybe a little bit further deeper into the draft. So Sydney have obviously backed what they've liked, and in him and Sheldrick have found a couple of workers, that's for sure.
2 really tough midfielders. It's an interesting point you make, Cal, because a couple of clubs were saying that Matty Roberts could have been the big slider of this year's draft pool. Certainly he has slid from where perhaps he was ranked a couple of months ago, which was in that sort of first round contention. But now he's a player that goes to Sydney alongside Angus Sheldrick, workman-like midfield, 2 really classic Swans picks that'll... They haven't been afraid to blood youngsters early the last couple of years. You look at James Rowbottom, Justin McInerney, those type of players. So they've done that in the past. North Melbourne up next. I'm expecting a small forward from the Kangaroos. I think this is where they start going needs-based. They've taken a couple of really good players early in, obviously, Jason Horne-Francis with the first pick and Josh Goda with the second pick. I'm expecting them to go with a small forward here. Is that Zach Taylor?
It could be.
Could be. I'm not sure exactly who. I think small forward's the area they'll target, though.
Is Paul Curtis an option for them as a medium forward? He's a player who's kicked some goals this year for the Western Jets. To look at someone like Corey Preston, who does have some interest in the second half of the draft. Eamon Wilkinson, another mature age small forward who had some interest mid-season, was on the radar of a couple of clubs coming into this part of the draft tonight. So he's another one who could come into their contention at this point. Could Corey Warner be an option for clubs as we enter the mid-30s of the draft? The younger brother, of course, of Chad at the Swans. I think the Swans would have probably had a little bit of a look at him too.
I reckon it's Paul Curtis. I think that's the way they've gone. I think a player that you've written about in the past, Cal, he's dealt with some issues pre-draft. So
yeah, I mean, he was diagnosed with COVID-19, unfortunately, just weeks ago. Managed to get through that and managed to get out there and train recently for the Vic Metro training day last week, and managed to show clubs that he's right in the mix of clubs, and being in that second half of the draft. Paul Curtis as an option for North Melbourne. They've shown a lot of interest. We mentioned before that he would be right in that mix as a goal kicker, and well done.
Exactly what they've done.
He's a lively type. He's a surprise packet in so many ways in games. The performances that he put on the board earlier this year playing for the Western Jets, he was basically one out in the square sometimes for them, but he actually reminds me a little bit of what Eddie Ford was doing at times for the Western Jets last year, and that's just talent. It's just talent and ability, and there's some untapped talent and ability as well. So he kicked a handful of goals for Vic Metro earlier this year. If it wasn't for Sam Darcy kicking, I think, 6 that day, then the story might have been Paul Curtis kicking a handful as well and really lighting up with that left foot. So he is a prospect who no doubt can do some damage.
And a tough position to play too, being a small forward. So
bit of X factor as well in that North Melbourne forward line. I think if you look at it, they've got Jack Marnie, who's a really smart player but doesn't really have that X factor, that burst, that speed. I think Paul Curtis is that man. Now, Adelaide's an interesting one as well, because I reckon it could be a small forward for them as well, and I think this is where Zach Taylor might actually fall, a player we've been talking about for quite a long time.
I think Jake Saligo would be a good chance here.
Right, okay.
I think Jake Saligo would be a pretty good opportunity for him. Potentially Arlo Draper could come into things as well, someone we haven't spoken about inside that first 30 or so selection. So I think you're right though, Riley, to be around that mark. Is it Taylor? Is it Saligo? That's something that could shape what they do. And Blake Howes, could he get through to the Melbourne Footy Club? We know Melbourne's pick is coming up. They had some interest in him late in the first round. That'd be an ideal result for them because at that point he was in their mix. He's still on the board at this point. That's where you have to make a decision on, did you have someone lined up for this pick? Did the D's think that someone else was going to get through and they might have had their eye on? Or do you take the guy who's slid a little bit and could come into contention right around their selection? Are they now at the point where the Demons, who come into the draft at pick 39, will be wanting to come up?
Yeah, interesting to see. And a long time between drinks too for Adelaide, because their first pick obviously was 4 last night, where they took Josh Rochelle, the goal sneak. We are lucky enough now to be joined by Carlton's newest draftee in Jesse Motlop. They selected him with pick 27 tonight. Jesse, congratulations. Thank you so much for joining us on NAB AFL Draft Night Live. Just talk us through what, I guess, the last few hours have been like for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty crazy. I just heard you say Carlton's pick 27, and it's pretty surreal, so it hasn't really sunk in yet, and I'm just over the moon at the moment.
When was the last time the Blues spoke to you? Did you have any inkling that they might be selecting you tonight?
Yeah, so I had a meeting, my third meeting with them last week, and I guess I had a pretty good indication that it might be Carlton, but it all depended on a few other things, and lucky enough they selected me, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Jesse, congratulations, mate. Do you bring your podcast equipment over with you to Victoria?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm up, but I think I'll definitely get it back up and started, and yeah, I'll definitely bring it over and give it a crack.
Jesse, tell us about where you are. You're up in Darwin with family. How's the day been?
Oh, the day's been awesome. I've been doing a bit of filming at the moment, so we had a bit of a party yesterday, and yeah, unlucky not to get picked then, but the same family came over again today in the backyard, and we all watched it, and lucky enough went early and got to get it over and done with.
What are you filming? What do you got in store for us?
Oh, there's just a little doco going on. I can't give too much away, so you'll see soon.
I like it. A little bit of secrecy there. Obviously, we know that your dad, Daniel, played AFL football, of course, for North Melbourne and Port Adelaide. Has he given you some tips along the way? I know you love watching his highlights on YouTube.
Yeah, I obviously love watching his highlights, and I mean, Dad didn't really have to say much for me to, I guess, give me tips. I got to experience the whole lifestyle of an AFL player, and growing up, I went to trainings with him maybe every second day, and I used to run amok in the change rooms with the Burgoyne boys and all that. So I was lucky enough to have that experience, and yeah, he didn't have to say too much.
It's a big move, Jesse, from WA to Victoria. Do you know exactly when you'll make the move? Could it be in the next coming weeks, or is there a chance now that you don't come over until January once borders are a little bit more eased?
Yeah, well, obviously being up in Darwin, I think I get to go over on Sunday, so
Okay.
I'll go straight over and, yeah, hopefully get stuck into it.
Beautiful.
Oh, we look forward to it. We look forward to seeing what this film is all about. We know that you're really passionate and you have a goal of wanting to be a filmmaker as well as an AFL footballer, but we can't wait to see what you can produce for the Blues in 2022 and beyond. Congratulations once again, Jesse.
Thanks for having me.
Love it.
Thumbs up. Look at that.
Big thumbs up. We should plug his podcast. It's Deadly Discussion, so make sure you check that out. And I reckon he's probably doing a little doco on himself.
I hope so.
You might feature Cal Toomey. Who knows?
Who knows? Who knows? Look, it's a good pick, and I think Blues supporters will, as I said before, fall in love with his personality, and hopefully we can see some of that come out on the field too, because when that does express itself as a player, I think small forwards, in and off the best of them, always have a little bit of showmanship about them, don't they? And he's got that. He's been into the theatre background.
Yep.
He's always been really interested in the arts and that type of thing. So clubs have been quite enamoured with Jesse Motlop across this year.
I think we need a goal-off between Josh Rochelle and Jesse Motlop as well in the celebration.
I thought you were going to say a podcast off between Road to the Draft and Deadly Discussion.
Oh, well, I think we know who's going to win that one. Clearly Road
Deadly
to the Draft.
Discussion.
Clearly Road to the Draft, Cal Toomey. Come on. All right, well, Adelaide have been on the clock for a little while now. Can't be much longer. This is their second pick in the draft.
The other ones that could come into contention here is Hugh Jackson, the running midfielder from North Adelaide, who has had some interest across this year from Adelaide Crows and also Port Adelaide. He started the year like a house on fire, but sort of tapered off towards the back end of the season. Or as Riley spoke about, Zach Taylor versus Jake Saligo. Maybe they didn't view these guys as both being available, so that might be a really tight call given the interest levels in both of them.
Maybe they just need to put a bid on and buy themselves an extra 5 minutes,
Well,
Cal.
they are famous bidders as well. They did use the number one pick to bid last year. We know a bid still has to come on Josh Fay. Yeah, at that point, obviously, there's some big calls to be made. So, yeah, there's clearly some debate. Arlo Draper as a local option too could come into their considerations.
What do you like most about Arlo Draper?
I think it's his versatility.
Yeah.
I think that he can play off half back, midfield, half forward, a little bit of Archie Perkins in the way. He's got some spark and spunk there. So I expect him to go in the next 10 or so selections.
The Crows as a team went into the trade period looking to add small forward depth, which is why I think guys like Saligo and Taylor were on their radar and why they targeted Josh Rochelle. Maybe they got that in Josh Rochelle and that's why they're going to look elsewhere now. So it depends if they double up. What do? Do they go midfield depth? Do they go defence? Do they double up and go for that small forward craft that they wanted and they got last night in Josh Rochelle?
Interested to see how the Crows go next year. They bring in Jordan Dawson. They've had to give up a bit to get him. Clearly a first-round pick for next year has gone out because of that. To get to this point of his...
Lovely part of the world.
Yes, it is. He's got some real work rate, though, about him. So the Crows clearly were big fans of that. And as we spoke about, I think they would have been pretty content when they saw his name still on the board at pick 36.
I want to know where you think he starts his career because he's played a lot of footy in the midfield this year and throughout his junior career, but I know there are a couple of clubs that were looking to shape him as a small forward, maybe to start his career, maybe full-time.
Yeah, I think he's 180 centimetres, so there is that aspect to him. I don't think he's going to be a really, really good small forward. I think what his best craft is as a ball getter and an outside player potentially to start, and also maybe he can change things up a little bit too.
Now, we've been asking for a trade all night. I can tell you right now we have our first trade for night 2. Hallelujah. It is come. Collingwood have traded their 2022 future 4th round pick to GWS for pick 48.
Okay. So GWS
Yep.
get that one through. So we wait and see how they use that now.
The Pies get 48.
Yeah, so Collingwood have traded their future fourth round pick to
Gotcha.
GWS to pick 48. So the
Well,
Pies now have 48.
And the reason the Giants would have done that is because the bids come later than they expected for Josh Fay.
Okay,
So
so
they've
they
actually
can.
been excess in points.
Yep.
So they don't need all the points that they stacked up on during the trade period. So why not ship one of them out? They've actually got their 2 live picks from last night, and Josh Fay was going to be the end of their draft night tonight. Wherever that bid comes, they'd match it. So it's smart business from them to turn a pick that was basically going to become redundant under their trading to do that now and get that one through for next year.
And West Coast have gone local with Rhett Bazzo, their next selection here at pick 37. Rhett is a great player for them and someone who unfortunately has lost his father a little while ago, and he plays and is inspired and driven by the memory of his dad.
Yeah, and his dad was a great waffle player as well. So he'll be looking to play in his honour across his career. I know he talks about him and thinks about him every time he runs out on the field. And look, there's been some really great moments for Rhett Bazzo. I think it was this game against South Australia. We just saw the highlights there earlier this season for Western Australia, where he dominated as an intercept back. He can play key forward, and he did spend stages of this year playing as a key forward. I like him more as a key defender, and I think that's probably where he starts his AFL career.
Got a number of key defenders down there in, obviously, Tom Barrass, who's going to continue his career at West Coast for a long time to come. So he'll partner them in the next stage of his career. Just getting back on that trade with Collingwood, the other thing it does is it shapes them really nicely. They'll have 3 picks within 6 selections between 46 and 52. Obviously got Nick Dacos last night, but clubs like picks in bunches, and they've got picks in bunches now, 3 between 46 and 52.
It'll be fascinating to see how they do that, because they've known for a while that their draft was going to be a late run thing apart from Dacos. So they've been putting in plenty of time into the second half of the draft and how that would play out for them. They've been so active in terms of the trades and pick swaps throughout the trade period, even through the pick swaps period. And then again tonight they've been busy. So that is something that they have looked at to do from their perspective, to be really, I guess, versatile and flexible with their draft hand, because you never knew where that bid was going to come. At that point a few months ago, it could have still come at number 1 for Nick Dacos, and that would have changed how they planned. And what's given them flexibility is the bid coming at pick 4.
Okay, so North Melbourne with pick 38 have selected Miller Bergman from the Dandenong Stingrays. Where's Miller's, I guess, best position?
It's as a half forward, I think, but he's done some different things at half back. He's been a line breaker. His versatility is a weapon for him. He did move forward earlier in the year and kick a few goals to be an impact player for his side, but yeah, he's got some real athleticism. He's pretty lightly framed, but he had some real star moments earlier this year, and I think there's a lot to like about his kicking and what he does in that stage of the ground. So watch for him to be given some time to develop, but I think that when you judge what we saw in the first half of the year from Miller Bergman at NAB League level, then that's probably about right in terms of him fitting in for the Roos.
All right, a versatile player there for North Melbourne to go along with Josh Goda and, of course, Jason Horne-Francis and Paul Curtis. So they've got a nice little hand here.
Yeah, they've done really well for themselves, I think. Melbourne up next now.
I think they have to take Blake Howes. I think they have to take Blake Howes, and they'd be wrapped, I think, that if...
I can't believe he's gotten through, to be honest.
No, I'm sure they can't believe he's gotten through. He was in the consideration for their first round pick, which they obviously used on Jacob Van Rooyen, the second last pick of last night. That was pick 19.
I think it's going to take them too long either.
There it is.
There it is. They didn't need long at all. About 20 seconds, they saw, oh, Blake Howes is still on the whiteboard. They've probably been hoping that no one else picked him up this whole time.
They would have been willing that one through. There's no doubt about that over the last handful of selections. As it gets closer and closer, you get more and more nervous as recruiting teams. I think that, you know, is this player going to get there? Is he going to get there?
Well,
and
he's
then
got there.
You make some calls. Are you keen on him? Do we move up 1 or 2 spots? Are we at the point now where we do that? In the end, he was too good for them to pass up. So, yeah, really versatile player. We've spoken about that. Can he start his career as a half forward, as a half back, as a wingman? Yeah, there's a lot to like. Obviously, great mates with Finn Callahan, who we know went at pick 3 to the Giants last night, and he'll be rapt to see his close mate get a chance at the Demons, the Premiers, next year.
It's interesting because Melbourne's one of the sides that actually plays with two traditional wingmen. I like Blake House's best footy on a wing, and for a long time Melbourne's been willing to really spread the ground and open the ground as much as possible with two traditional wingers that stay and hold their width on either side of the ground. This year they did it to great success with Ed Langdon and Angus Brayshaw. So whether or not they see Blake House as someone that can do that long term for them as well, and it perhaps gives Brayshaw and Langdon the ability to try their hand elsewhere on the field, is really interesting where they see the next phase of Blake House's development.
So that is the end of round 2 for the 2021 NAB AFL Draft. If we just go back to the top, it was Fremantle who had the first pick of the night. That was pick 21, and they took Matthew Johnson, the local. They've got 3 locals now in Jai Amos, Neil Erasmus and Matthew Johnson. So all those boys who played in the WA side now play for the Fremantle Dockers. They've got a nice little trio there of players, and what a relief for Matthew Johnson, obviously having to wait from last night after being at that event and seeing his now 2 teammates get picked up before him.
It's great when you see this, that didn't get picked last night but doesn't have to wait long tonight. The anxiety that he would have felt over the last 24 hours over straight away, gets onto an AFL list and gets onto a club where I really think he's probably going to have a chance over the next few years. He's going to have Neil Erasmus as a teammate. He's going to have Jai Miss as a teammate. There's spots opening up in that Fremantle midfield with Adam Cerra leaving the club, and one of either Erasmus or Matt Johnson I think can fill it potentially even as soon as next year.
All right, we have another trade that we can bring you now, and that is Adelaide has traded their future 3rd round pick to Melbourne for pick 43. So now that Melbourne have Blake House, they've got the man that they want, they're willing to trade that on. So Adelaide now have pick 43 in this year's draft. So that's when the 3rd round gets underway in a few minutes' time. Then
and I think that
is that with the player in mind?
Well, from a Melbourne point of view, it means that their last pick will be later in the piece, and then they just pick up Woden.
Yep.
They've only been planning on using 3 picks.
True.
In the end, they get Van
forgot about Taj.
Rooyen through the door last night. They get Howes through the door tonight, and then they pick up Woden with their last pick. So they're probably at this point, unless something dramatic happens, they do have an extra spot available to them potentially to use as a rookie on Friday. But that's probably the reason why they've done that, and they found a taker in the Crows form. And the Crows now might look to see, can they get Taylor through there? Is Draper their man? Is Jackson their man in a couple of spots? And that definitely could be the case.
All right, not long now till the start of the 3rd round. We'll just go back. We talked about Matthew Johnson and then Josh Goda. What a great story as well. It's his graduation tonight, but he's a lifelong Roos fan and he gets picked up with pick 22. He's at North Melbourne now, and just a terrific story. We've had so many of those, like kids barracking for their clubs and ending up there. It's great to see.
It is great to see. Sounds like there might have been a couple of bites of the cherry at this Melbourne and Adelaide trade. They might have tried to trade a few times before it, and then found out that that they couldn't trade picks that had already been exchanged during the trade period.
Right.
And this is what they've ended up coming to. They've ended up finding a way to get this deal done, and that's how it's gone through in the end.
God, it's complicated, isn't it? Some of these things. Do you reckon, like, in each room with clubs, they've got one person who's on the calculator working out the point system if you've got bidding and stuff, another person with a rule book just sitting there going, how many future picks have we traded out, not traded out? I mean, you'd have to have all of that covered.
I did see a video on the Adelaide website of Justin Reid, the list manager, talking through the roles of each player in their department, or each person in the department in the draft room, and who calls through the picks, who types them in, who does the computer over there, who's managing this area from here. So it's very much a role-driven room for all of the clubs, and it's know your role, play your role. There's no difference to being out there on the field. This is a well-oiled machine sometimes.
And it's a high-pressure situation too, because you do not want to get this wrong.
No, that's right. And it's worth remembering as well, in terms of the picks being swapped back and forth, Melbourne and the Crows were involved in that big 4-way deal during the trade period as well, where 3 million picks went everywhere. So that's probably where this maybe level of confusion has come from.
All right, so Sydney will have the first pick in round 3. So we're looking at pick 40 at the moment. When we look at what Sydney has already done, last night they took Angus Sheldrick, which was a little bit of a surprise to us, I guess, and then Matthew Roberts tonight. So 2 tough midfielders. Where do they look to now? Is there a certain area you think they need to bolster further?
In terms of areas, I don't think there's an area that really stands out that is absolutely able to be addressed with this selection at pick 40. But the players who could come into consideration, we haven't spoken a lot about Corey Warner, the younger brother of Chad. They've shown some interest in him across this year.
Be a fun midfield duo.
It would. And Chad's got the same sort of power that Corey does in terms of what we see in his game through the midfield. So he's an option. Zach Taylor, as we spoke about before, I do, as we mentioned, wonder whether their selection in the first round would change what they do with Zach Taylor if they're just a little bit too similar in size. Could Hugh Jackson come into contention here? We wait and see what Cooper Murley's doing with his draft contention. I think he's sort of been a 40 to 60 part of the draft player. Earlier this year, I think some people were sort of recognised him potentially as a top 20 pick. Injuries halted some of his development this season. So there's a few names that could come into the mix for the Swans as they get round 3 off and running soon.
Well, it is. They're on the clock now, the Sydney Swans. They have 5 minutes to make their selection. We'll see what they have in store for us. Then it's Brisbane at 41, the Western Bulldogs. Now, they haven't had a pick since they took Sam Darcy. They matched that bid at pick 2, so they've had a long time to kind of mull over what they might do here at pick 42 now. What are you thinking, Riley, the Western Bulldogs need? I don't think they need any more key forwards, that's for sure.
No, they're pretty balanced across the board. I mean, would they like another key defensive option and who's still on the board? Maybe they were looking at someone like a Rhett Bazzo who's already gone. I mean, they've had to bring in Tim O'Brien because they lost Lewis Young. Easton Wood obviously left the club, retired earlier this summer. So would they like another key defensive option? I'm not sure if there's too many left on the board, Cal. The recruiters went into this draft not confident on the depth of key position talent. Some good ones early, and the Western Bulldogs got one of the few good ones early in Sam Darcy. But beyond that, I'm not sure. They lose Pat Lipinski. Do they need a midfield replacement for him and potentially a forward-half midfield replacement that can do a bit of work on the outside? That's another question that Western Bulldogs will be considering. I think if you're the Dogs, though, you can afford to target the best available player. You trust your draft board. You've just made the grand final. You won a premiership 5 years ago. You're going to compete again for the next few years. So I think they can trust their draft board and just take the best player available.
No, they're in a very good spot, the Western Bulldogs. They've been very blessed, let's be honest. Jamara Ugle-Hagan last year and then Sam Darcy this year.
Couldn't ask for more, could you?
No, you couldn't.
Imagine if they were
Exactly.
the same year. That would have been some points stacking at
Oh. Would they even been able to make
They'd
that
have had
work?
every pick in the 40s, wouldn't they? 40, 41.
It would have just been bid after bid after
I think
bid,
it would have
really.
been a recognition from Sam Power and the Bulldogs, this management team, that, we're going into deficit.
Yeah, I think
Might wipe out next year's first round pick.
And I think you'd be okay with that,
Yes,
most
you would be.
certainly. All right, about 2.5 minutes left on the clock for the Sydney Swans at this stage.
I find them an interesting prospect because of the fact they lost two pretty good midfielders in George Hewitt and Jordan Dawson during the trade and free agency period. But I look at their group and you might think, right, they lost two, do they bring two more in? Yes, they did in Sheldrick, which is a good pickup, and Matty Roberts as well, another good pickup. They get two midfield bulls. But they'd also probably promised more midfield time to players on the outskirts of that team. James Rowbottom, Justin McInerney, Chad Warner drifted in and out of the side this year. They need to get Braden Campbell in as a full-time midfielder eventually. I know he started his career off half-back. Errol Goulden's probably another one they want to play more through the midfield, having started his career forward this year. They've got a lot of talent on their list, Sydney, and we spoke to Kenny Beatson earlier this week and we said, were you surprised by just how quickly he rose back up the ladder in 2021? He said, yes and no, I think. Like, maybe it's happened a bit quicker than we expected, but we thought this was within the group. I think that's going to go from strength to strength next year. I think even though they lose a couple of really quality players through the trade period, they're able to supplement from what they've already done over the last 3 or 4 years through the draft.
They've just got an incredible ability, don't they, the Sydney Swans, to not bottom out and just to keep regenerating under John Longmire.
Yeah,
It's
and
just been absolutely phenomenal to watch.
It is aided somewhat by the academy, and we've seen Braden Campbell and Errol Goulden last year, Nick Blakey before that. But there's players that they've picked that I don't think many clubs would have taken those players where they picked them. James Rowbottom's one, Justin McInerney's another, Chad Warner's maybe another. They've backed in their draft board. And they've played senior footy for this football club, and really good senior footy as well. So it's not just the academy. That can be used as a stick to beat them with, or as a way to damn them with faint praise, I guess, in a sense. But the ability to trade and get players into the club, and also to draft and get players into the draft, has been really strong over a long period of time. Maybe they do it with Angus Sheldrick this year.
We have a trade that I can announce. Carlton have traded pick 55 to Port Adelaide for a future 4th round pick.
And there was no need. Did Carlton get back into the draft? There's no need for Carlton to get back into the draft because they can only take one pick this year. So Port Adelaide keen, obviously, to get another player.
Well, they can get in a play now potentially before they pick up Jace Burgoyne. So that gives them extra manipulation of that area of the draft. And Corey Warner,
Hey.
They've done it.
As we
From
thought,
East Fremantle.
joins the brothers up at
Yes.
the Sydney
I
Footy
like
Club.
it.
The Warner family would be happy, both of them over there in the Harbour City. And look, there are some flashes of his brother in the way he plays the game. There's no doubt. Nathan Schmook, our great colleague on AFL.com.au, wrote a great article with Corey Warner just a couple of weeks ago and spoke about how the Swans had been the club that had shown the most interest in him. And look, he's different in terms of his kicking, but there is a lot of similarities in the power and a level of explosiveness. He has some run and carry, and this has always been around his draft range. So a great night for the Warner family. We love nothing more than to see the father's sons and then the brothers join up at the same club.
Yeah, it's always good. I wonder if he's just as good a cricketer as Chad. We saw a vision of Chad making 100 earlier this summer back in Western Australia in a T20 game. I wonder if he's just as good a cricketer. But very good footballer, as Cal said, another one that can run through that midfield. Tell you what, they've added some beef to this midfield stock, haven't they, Cal? I mean, Angus Sheldrick last night, Corey Warner now, Matty Roberts earlier tonight. Yep. Three really big-bodied, hard-nosed midfielders.
It's obviously their strategy, wasn't it?
They're preparing for life after Josh Kennedy, clearly, aren't they? And Luke Parker, who... Yeah, he's had a great season, won the best and fairest, signed another long-term deal, but that'd probably see him out in terms of his career, that deal that he signed this year as a free agent. So you're planning for 3, 4, 5 years down the track, and these guys, through the midfield options that they've brought in, clearly they've identified that as a need. Now we see the Lions enter the frame. This will be their last pick off the night. Jamison Ballantyne has been a player that has been linked here, as has Bryce Watson. Ballantyne, a wingman from the Greater Western Victoria Rebels. Bryce Watson, a half-back runner. There are a couple of names that could come into things. I think they had some interest in potentially getting Kyle Lohmann through to this pick, but that's why they thought, you know what? And given how the night's unfolded, he wouldn't have got through. So they had to go with their second pick, their second first-round pick to grab him. So he's potentially, or those guys are potentially in that mix for pick 41 for the Lions, and that'll be 10 more picks. I don't expect too many more picks than 60 tonight. So really fascinating to see if we'll see some ex-AFL players get some opportunities as well. There might be one or two on the way with the next remaining selections. And very soon we'll start to see some clubs pass as well. So they'll tap out of this draft, leave a spot open. And eventually...
here we go. This is what we've been waiting for.
How's the irony here? This is a little bit of payback from the Bulldogs.
This is nice.
You bid on Sam Darcy at pick 2. We'll bid at 42 on Josh Fay.
I don't think it really
That's
even...
insane.
It doesn't
I'm sure
really
the Giants are
even
really quaking in their boots.
This is what happens when you bid on number 2 on our father's son. We go on 42. Josh Fay, we're coming for you.
No one bids on the Western Bulldogs as father's son players and gets away.
Oh, dear. Well, what do you think the Giants are going to do here, Cal?
I think
they'll match it instantly, won't they?
They will, and they've got enough points to do this. And there's a little bit of irony around that one. And a little bit of gamesmanship between the clubs. And this is a rivalry that extends many years, doesn't it? It goes back to 2016 in particular, that preliminary final and some of the action before then. And then we know some of the spiteful finals that have been played since then. And now we have the bidding chapter of a rivalry that we see, the 2021 draft that we remembered for between these two clubs. But look, Josh Fay is a really good player and a good pick for 42 as well, because from the Giants' perspective. And this is what happens with academy players. We see Marcus Windhager still hasn't received a bid either, because there's just the expectation that you're not going to probably get them. Someone has to do the deed and put their hand up and do the bidding on behalf of the competition at a certain stage. But this is why they do fall down a little bit, because the clubs haven't done as much work on them, particularly in under-resourced draft departments and recruiting departments these days.
And I like this from a fit perspective for the Giants. I mean, they drafted Lockie Ash with pick 4 a few years ago, probably with the mindset of playing him off half-back throughout the entirety of his career. But such has been his development and his ability to play midfield. He's actually spent more and more time in there over the last couple of years. Isaac Cumming, another player that's come through their academy, has played off half-back for them recently, done a really good job. But now they've got Josh Fay as a player that can be a dual weapon with Isaac Cumming for the next sort of 5 or 6 years and hopefully make a name for himself. Great kid, came through their academy system.
A taller midfielder, 193 centimetre prospect out of the Eastern Rangers. So he's one, but apart from that, there's probably not too many left on the board. Arlo Draper's still there as a versatile player. He's slipping at the moment. Zach Taylor as a Calder Cannons ball getter and ball user.
Shocked by that. Really surprised by that.
Still on the board. Cooper Hamilton is a player who could get some interest at this point of the draft, who clubs have done some interviews with and have had a look at. Lewis Rayson's a user of the footy out of half-back they're another club, as we spoke about, in terms of Melbourne's list needs. I mean, what do the Bulldogs really need apart from the ruckman or a key defender?
Well, you mentioned Melbourne there. A few picks ago, they selected with pick 39 Blake Howes from the Sandringham Dragons, and he's been good enough to join us on NAB AFL Draft Night Live. Blake, welcome to you. Congratulations on officially becoming a Demon. I can see you've got an audience behind.
On grand final day, you know what? Sam Power was at this game, and he was watching there, the list manager and recruiting boss at the Western Bulldogs, and he would have seen Arthur Jones sidestep his way, shimmy his round a few opponents and really catch the eye. There's no doubt about the fact that he was exciting that day, and he was probably the storyline to come out of that day, apart from a couple of injuries. He burst onto the scene pretty late and has that knack for winning the footy and taking him on. So we see his goal kicking come to the fore at different stages across this season, and the Bulldogs get a pretty nifty player in the forward half.
And a fit player as well. Finished second in the West Australian Combine for the 2 kilometre time trial. So he can run all day. He's got that sidestep, which we saw on grand final day. Really nice prospect. It's funny how these things work out, which you mentioned with Sam Power. The fact that he was over there for the grand final obviously would have caught him beforehand and thought, hey, maybe this is a kid that could end up at the Western Bulldogs and help us take the next step next year.
So Adelaide's now on the clock. You both are wrong.
Well, we said he was in the mix.
Well, exactly. No, he is in the mix. Another classy small mid from the Calder Cannons. This time, Zach Taylor makes his way to the Adelaide Crows.
Well, they've got a group of smaller players, don't they, at the Crows? There is a group. They obviously picked up Chase Jones and Ned McHenry a couple of years ago. We know a couple of others. Lockie Scholl plays off half-back, a smaller type, but you can never have too many players who are footballers and good kicks. And
an exceptional kick.
The new Mosquito fleet, perhaps?
Potentially, Nat. Potentially. He's a really good user of the footy, very smart player. I know some clubs had him ranked inside the top 25. And where the Crows are picking now at 44, they probably would have had him inside their top 30 as well, I'd imagine. So he gets through to that point, and they moved up the board. If they maybe hadn't have done that a couple of picks later, maybe the Bombers could have looked at him. So there's a bit of an interest there across a number of clubs for Zach Taylor, and he joins the Adelaide Footy Club. And yeah, as we said, we'll go over as another Victorian alongside Rochelle and also Saligo.
So I've got a question for you, Cal. They've taken Zach Taylor with pick 44. They took Jake Saligo with pick 36. You mentioned there whether or not they would have been weighing up. Are they too similar to Rochelle to take both? Could they have also been weighing up which one would have still been there at 43?
Potentially that.
44, sorry. And they might have said to themselves, well, Saligo might not be there at 44, whereas Zach Taylor will be there at 44, so you take the risk on Saligo early and Zach Taylor late.
Yeah, that could be something that they weighed up for sure. And you have to be mindful of that when you're making these calls late in the piece, because as we spoke about earlier, at this point of the draft, it's about targeting the individual player rather than the group, because I think at this point there'd be clubs saying, well, how many are left on my board? And how many can we go and get at this point?
Okay, so we've just had a trade. Now, Collingwood have traded pick 47 and a future third-round pick to Geelong for pick 45. So this is now Collingwood's pick. So Collingwood are now on the clock. It's
They've gone
not
up to
Geelong.
get someone. They clearly think that the Giants, that the Bombers or
might snag
the Cats
a player.
might snag a player. So they've gone up to get somebody, and we wait and see who can come into their view. Hugh Jackson's there, Arlo Draper's there, Cooper Hamilton's there.
And they've gone Arlo Draper, the South Australian, such a versatile player and a really unique individual. We had him on the Road to the Draft podcast. A great character.
Yeah, I think so. I definitely believe that. And it's good to see him picked here. I'm excited to see what Arlo might bring at the next level. He could be one of the steals of the draft, I think, to get to this point. So much talent. He's been hard to nail down in terms of what type of player he can be at the next level. He's a good mark above his head. He'll improve his running once he gets to an AFL club. He uses the ball really well. He's got skills and class. And I think it's a really good mix for what the Pies have already brought through the door tonight and last night. So a point of difference for their midfield. We know they've picked up a taller midfielder during the trade period, Rolly, in Pat Lipinski. And we potentially see Arlo Draper playing a similar sort of role for the Pies.
All right.
It begs an interesting question, though, doesn't it? Sorry, Nat.
No, you're fine.
Essendon or Geelong, did Collingwood think one of them would have taken Arlo Draper with their next couple of picks?
Geelong had a little bit of interest, but the Bombers as well had been linked to him as well. So maybe they've got word that both of those clubs must be doing it. In saying that, though, they did the deal with Geelong.
Yes.
So if Geelong was...
Maybe suggests that Essendon was the club.
Well, it suggested their intel probably meant that it was Essendon.
Yeah.
Whether it actually was or not, who would ever
So now
know?
Adrian Dodoro is going to be a little bit unhappy if
And of
that
course-
was his player.
And of course, Port Adelaide on night one moved up to get ahead of the Bombers to take Josh Sid.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting
Very
storyline
smart
there too.
move, yes. So Essendon now on the clock with pick 46. We take a look at what they've already done and...
Hobbsy.
That's right, Ben Hobbs.
Hobbs,
I
pick
had to
13.
go all the way back to
It
last
seems like
night.
forever
They've
ago,
done
doesn't it?
nothing. I know. So it's been a long wait for Essendon and their recruiting team. What do you think they need, Cal? Because their midfield seems pretty stacked right now.
Yeah, I think so. There's obviously a need. They could get a taller midfielder. That would be a point of difference. They could go for a small forward here. They definitely need some extra small forwards within their footy club. They need an extra tall forward as well. And they could do with some extra defensive cover. Look, they're far from the finished product, the Bombers, so they need some help on different lines. Jack Williams is still on the board. He kicked 40 goals in the waffle this season at Colts level, a key forward in WA. He could come into their thinking. Do they go for Corey Preston, a small forward who has actually spent some time across half-back? He's an overager. He had some interest mid-year, but I think he's got enough to his game to be an option for clubs, and clubs have interviewed him recently. Would they look at Ronald Fijo Jr., as a potential late pick? It's probably a little bit too early for him. He might be one that's held over for either rookie or as a train-on pick. But there's a couple of names. The other one is Alistair Lord as a dashing defender who impressed at the SA Draft Combine. So there's a group of guys. It might not come from that group of guys, but they're still on the board. Hugh Jackson, another midfielder. They do have some interest too in Jace Burgoyne. So we wait and see.
We see a bid.
Well, last year they did bid on Maurice Rioli Jr. Pretty late in the piece. I think that was about 2 a.m. by the time that bid comes through.
We were
last
on the
year's draft.
floor at that point. Just having a nap.
It's interesting because Port Adelaide we saw traded back into the draft with Carlton. We don't think that was for draft points necessarily, would it be? Or would that have been to get a pick before Jace Burgoyne?
I think it would be most likely to see if they can adjust their draft hand to get a pick in before Burgoyne, and the way it's going, it looks like that might come through unless a bid is placed here. We've got a minute to go or so on the clock, so they've had a little bit of time to think about it, the Bombers. Obviously a bit of a gap between their picks. We know that as the night started, or the draft started, their second pick was actually in the early 50s. That's come in a few spots because picks have gone back to the end of the draft after the bids have come in. So the draft order is so fluid. There hasn't been as many trades as we expected, but they've started to come through a little bit more recently as players have been left on the board, and the Draper example was certainly one of those.
So about a minute left on the clock for Essendon at this point. Thanks so much for sticking with us here on afl.com.au and the AFL Live app. It's been great to have your company. If you do need to nip off to bed, you can catch all the latest draft news on AFL Daily tomorrow morning. But you probably might as well just stay up. But if you
don't go anywhere.
AFL
We're just getting
Daily
into the
is
fun
where
stuff.
it's at.
You don't want to turn off now.
People need to go to bed.
No, it's early. It's 5:30 in Perth. Mentioned they had shown some interest in him in the lead up to the draft, and like his pizzazz off the defensive line that he showed across this season. So Alistair Lord there. Of course, he's not the first Alistair Lord to come through the AFL ranks across history. There's a very famous one at Geelong, but we see a new Alistair Lord come into the AFL, and he's a bomber.
He is a bomber indeed. So that means Geelong is now on the clock at pick 47. As we know, they made a trade with Collingwood a few moments ago. So Geelong now have pick 47 in their hot little hands, and we wait.
Just be planning for the here and now in terms of the draft. They also need to know whether they want to hold over picks for next year's mid-season draft and keep open a spot so that some of the players... There we go. The bid for Marcus Windhager has come in.
Finally. So the Saints now will be on the clock to see if they match this bid that Geelong has mounted for Marcus Windhager. They already matched a bid earlier tonight for Machito Owens when that bid came earlier. So I do expect that you'd think they'd match this one, don't you?
Absolutely. It's a very good option for the Saints. I was just going to take a drink. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Please, go ahead, Riley.
I don't know. Okay, no, look, he's a good player, and I like his power.
Yep.
He plays off half-back. He plays through the midfield. He can play off the half-forward line as well. I watched him play a bit this year, and he's got genuine explosiveness out of the centre square and can do some pretty exciting things. He's come back from an ACL injury as well, so he'll work through his body and make sure that he is ready to go once he is ready to go.
So he might not play this year, do you think, with the back issue?
Well, that has to be worked through. Let's hope that it's okay. But obviously, it's a long-term approach. His career is about so much more than just next year. But it is a back injury that will take some management, at least in the early stages, and we wait and see from his perspective what that takes and requires going forward. But yeah, he'll be a Sainer, and it's a great result for the Saints Next Generation Academy, which is run by Jack Henty down there at the St Kilda Footy Club, and he does a great job.
And there you go. Boom. They've matched the bid for Marcus Windhager, which means Geelong get another 5 minutes on the clock as well.
A player that can potentially go forward to start his career as well, because he's got that forward half creativity. The St Kilda's a football club that's shown they're willing to be patient with these kids who are coming back from these injuries. They drafted Jack Bytel a few years ago, who's still at the football club, obviously, who had a nasty back injury when he joined. He's played some senior footy since then.
And there are some similarities at this point. Hopefully it's not as serious once he gets through to that stage, but there is a little bit of similarity there.
But they can afford to be patient as well, I think, with Marcus Windhager, in the sense that their midfield is so strong. They've already added Nazaya Wanganeen-Malira to it, as we know, Mitch Owens, as we know. And they've got a core group of big-bodied midfielders that can crack in. They're all experienced. Jack Steele was such a good player for them. We've seen Brad Crouch come to the football club in the last couple of years as well. So they can be patient with Marcus Windhager, and they'll know what he can produce when he has been fit, because, as we said, he is a member of their academy.
All right, so it's Geelong. You just got to keep up with all these moving parts and who's on the clock next. So, yeah, Geelong, as we mentioned, we talked about who they've now selected with their previous 3 picks. They've been very, very busy tonight, of course, not having a selection last... Oh, did they have a selection last night? No, they didn't.
No, they didn't. They won 2 clubs.
So we wait and see what they do, the Cats. Usually there's a tendency for the Stephen Wells camp to take a couple of Geelong lads, which they've ticked off. Maybe a South Australian in there, which they've ticked off. And wait and see if there's a Smoky in there as well, because
they've taken a few of them, haven't they?
They have over the years. We know Francis Evans was a pick a couple of years ago that surprised many on draft night on the second night. So that will be an interesting one for clubs out there to look at.
All right, we'll wait and see what the Cats are doing at the moment. And then, of course, we've got Collingwood at pick 49 after trading something with... they traded with GWS, actually. So, yeah, it's Collingwood who has pick 49.
Can I just say with the Cats, I kind of expected them to come into this draft period needing a small forward. They chased a couple during the trade period, but they've picked up Tyson Stengel as a delisted free agency. He played a bit of footy at Richmond and Adelaide.
So with pick 48, Geelong have selected Flynn Kroger. So probably another one of those little smokies that we spoke about. And of course, Collingwood is now on the clock at pick 49.
Yeah, Flynn Kroger's an option for them and has had some interest as well from a number of other clubs. So it'll be interesting to see now, was he the guy that other clubs are looking at pretty late? There was some interest in him from a couple of clubs, and I guess the Cats will jump in now, be pretty happy that they got him as a late pick and didn't have to use a rookie selection for him. So he comes through, and now we wait and see what the Pies do at their pick, because as we know, they've had some options for them late in this year's draft, and yeah, it's one that they should be pretty excited about, because they have been working their way around this later stages of the draft order, and there might be some players who slip through, like Cooper Murley, here we are, who is an option who earlier this year, if not for injury, would have gone a little bit higher. So that's certainly a capacity for him to do that. He's a half forward. He can play through the midfield. He had some injuries this year with his ankle and then an AC joint injury, a member of the NAB AFL Academy as well. So, yeah, there's no doubt that he's got some real ability. We didn't see the best of him this year, but certainly has some wheels. Earlier this year was given some similarities to Zach Butters in that type of smaller midfielder who's quite tenacious and can deliver the ball by foot, as we see with some of his finishing skills. So he could be a bit of a steal. And in back-to-back, the Pies have gone with South Australians alongside Nick Dacos earlier in the piece.
They like the South Australians, the Pies. There you go. So that is what they're up to at the moment. Then we're up to pick 50. We're getting there. And Essendon is on the clock at the moment, as we spoke about before. Ben Hobbs was their pick last night, a midfielder, and then they've gone with Alistair Lord from Norwood, a bit of a bolter.
Yes. Can I say as well with Flynn Kroger, Geelong lost Jordan Clark during the trade period, which we all know about. They targeted him probably more as a rebounding defender. And Flynn was a player that probably did a little bit of that this year throughout the NAB League, played a little bit off that rebounding. I think they've identified something in him with his speed and with his dash off half back and the signs that he's managed to produce at times for in the NAB League doing that. Maybe that's the type of player they see him as being, someone that's definitely a bolter, but someone that they can see maybe playing that Jordan Clark role in the future.
Right, what are the Bombers?
It's the third round of the 2021 NAB AFL Draft. Thank you for sticking with us here on afl.com.au and the AFL Live app. Plenty still to come, so we're waiting for Essendon at the moment, and then with pick 51, that's Melbourne's selection as well, still to come, which has since been traded, it appears. So there is a trade that has gone down. I'll get the details of that very shortly, but...
Melbourne's traded pick 51 to the Saints for a future fourth round pick, and we love a future fourth. They have a special part.
Carlton traded one to Port Adelaide.
The trade and draft landscape, the future fourth round pick. They don't have a lot of love. Everyone just wants to get rid of them. But in this case, it's an interesting one because they've still got Tajway Woden to come as a father-son player. I think the expectation for Tajway Woden was an unlikely bid for a father-son of his level, and we also haven't seen a bid yet for Jace Burgoyne, and of course I don't think we'll see a bid for Jackson Archer as well as he heads to North Melbourne with their last pick. So there's at least 3 more picks to come, which nudges us up to nearly, I think we'll get to the early 60s just in terms of picks. I'd be surprised if there's many more than that. So we're nudging probably 8 or 9 live spots left in the draft, I think.
Start to see clubs pass in the next, I guess, half an hour or so as we continue as the Bombers make their selection. And with pick 50, Essendon has selected Garrett McDonald.
You know what I love about this draft? We've had a Neil, we've had an Arthur.
Now we've got a Garrett.
Now we've got a Garrett.
We need a Kevin, don't you reckon? I want to see a Kev again. But Garrett, tell us a little bit about Garrett.
I'll tell you something, he's a bolter.
This is what happens when we get to this time of the night. There's always a Smokies, and as good as and amazing as Callan Riley are, you can't possibly know 863 draft hopefuls inside and out, and that's how many draft hopefuls actually nominated for this year's draft. So you're doing very, very well if you know every single one off by heart. But
he's come from the Richmond VFL program, so he's out of the VFL there, and we wait and see what Adrian Dodoro and the recruiting team there have spotted. So definitely a Smoky.
But in a sense, this is what we love about the draft, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I don't think many people would have had Garrett on their draft boards at this pick. But clubs can find someone from anywhere, and we mentioned Geelong before managed to find Francis Evans, who's played some good footy. They've had a long history of doing that. Essendon now find someone from Richmond's VFL program, and hopefully
mature age is about 26. So there's someone who's come through the system, a formerly listed as part of the 2014 draft, so overlooked for a number of years now. They've clearly spotted something to have a look at there. So the Bombers grab him, and then the Saints pick up Oscar Adams as a key back option for them to pick up some extra bolstering there. I think they had their eyes on Josh Gibcus earlier this year, earlier in the trade period, of course, in the draft period with the Nazai Wanganeen-Malira pick, and there's no doubt that through their list build, they'd be wanting to add to some players in that area of the ground. So they pick up Oscar Adams, and I think that's probably a nice selection. They obviously lost Oscar Claverino through a delisting in recent months too.
And Jake Carlisle and James Frawley to retirement recently, so they were a bit slim down back. I think it's been an area of focus for them for a long period of time now. They've targeted mature age players to potentially fill voids down there for a long period of time. Oscar Adams is someone who's very raw, might take a couple of years to develop in the system, but someone they'll give time to, and hopefully he can turn into the next long-term key defender for them.
All right, so this is the last pick now of the third round of the 2021 NAB AFL Draft. So it lies with Collingwood, pick 52, and then when we move forward into round 4, Hawthorn has that very first pick at 53. So Collingwood already tonight, they've been busy with Cooper Murley and Arlo Draper from South Australia. That's to add on to Nick Dacos, of course, who they selected last night, the father-son, the son of the Macedonian marvel. And of course, we love brothers being united together at football clubs. We've already seen that tonight as well with the Warner family. But obviously Nick and Josh Dacos geez, playing together in 2022, that's going to be some fun.
Yeah, it will be, and we're all very excited to see that happen and to see that unfold. Okay, the Collingwood pick here is Harvey Harrison. He's a midfield 7, though.
Yeah, geez. What's going on there? Something in the water over in...
Well, they've played.
Yeah, well, that is true.
And this is interesting whereby Victorian prospects might miss out later in the piece because some of the South Australians and West Australians have got full seasons over the past 2 years. But Harvey Harrison from North Adelaide there, no doubt, has put together a pretty good catalogue of performances this season. He's got a good running capacity and has taken the eye at different stages of this year. So a ball getter, and there's no doubt that he has shown the consistency to be in this sort of range of the draft. So he's a worthy draftee, Riley. His output across this year has been pretty consistent, and he joins Arlo Draper and also Cooper Murley at the Pies.
I like what Collingwood's done.
With pick 53, Jai Sarong.
Now, this is interesting because it's right before Fremantle.
I know. I just thought that. So they've snagged the brother of Caleb Sarong, and I wonder what the Dockers are thinking right at this very moment.
Well, that would be interesting because the Dockers did have some interest in him, and that was set to be the Dockers' last pick in the draft. So how they use that now will be interesting, whether they just take Eric Benning or their academy player with that, or they just see if they can push him through to a Category B rookie. Jai Sarong's a very different player to Caleb. Caleb's, we know, such a nuggety, small midfielder who's so hard-headed. He's prolific, he's productive. Jai Sarong's 193 centimetres. He had an up-and-down season. It just didn't get the groove to his game, but there's a lot of athleticism and ability to work with there, and we love a bloodline story. So a different player to Caleb.
Where do you think he plays?
I think he plays as a third tall forward.
Okay.
I think that's the ultimate role for him, and with the running ability that he'll be able to build as he gets into an AFL club, that's probably the role that he takes on at the next stage.
I think they need some depth, particularly forward of the ball and particularly marking-wise. I mean, Jacob Kaczynski had a good year this year. Mitch Lewis, we've seen promising signs from him, but Jack Gunston's coming towards the end of his career. And for his size of this 193 centimetre prospect, that's what Jack Gunston sort of is. He's played as that lead-out role. I think Kaczynski and Lewis are more stay-at-home forwards, whereas maybe they see Jai Sarong as someone that can be that lead-up forward for them and just take over Jack Gunston long-term.
And 57 now.
Interesting what they do here. Do they take one of their other academy boys who they have, Jack Peris, who's the son of Nova Peris, the former Olympian, of course, who's a speedy type, a smaller forward, but genuine zip to him, and you'd hope that he was quick.
Yeah, definitely.
When his mum's running in the Olympics. So
they've done really well with their Next Generation Academy, haven't they, St Kilda?
Yeah, and the other player nominated from the academy is Josiah Kyle, a small forward, medium forward option who is electrifyingly fast, actually, who could come into their thinking here. I'm not sure if they rate one or the other higher or not, but those guys would come into their viewpoint. Charlie Dean is another one that they could look at, but they might have addressed the key back area with Oscar Adams. Yeah. Charlie Dean has had some interest from Collingwood as well, maybe as a rookie. We wait and see how that progresses over the next handful of spots, but obviously a player who's taken out that VFL Rising Star Award, and that's usually a breeding ground for AFL careers. So we wait and see again if that one comes to fruition over tonight or potentially tomorrow for Charlie Dean. But he has had some interest from St Kilda, but it'll be up to them to make a call. The other thing with the academy boys worth mentioning too, like Eric Benning and what the Dockers' choice was, they can also see if they just move them through to Category B rookies and bypass the rookie draft tomorrow if undrafted tonight.
So Hawthorn the first club to pass, and we'll probably will see this a fair bit now, so we should roll on through these next couple of rounds. St Kilda have also passed on their next 2 picks, which leaves us now at West Coast with the next live pick. If we look at what West Coast has already...
They've wiped out those selections, and we wait and see what's left now, if anything.
Yeah, they're passing again, so... we might be at the end here, but 65 players in 2021, which is pretty much around the mark of what you said once again. Tick.
Yeah, the modelling was right. The modelling had to do the...
Okay, we don't need that. We've had enough corona modelling over the last 2 years.
Yeah. No, it's funny how it works out because clubs often, always think they underestimate how many picks there's going to be, and then they get there on the night and there's players available for them. You know, the Port Adelaide Footy Club, they come in, was it going to be 2 or 3 picks? They ended up taking, 4 because Dante Vicentini was still there on the board, and he gets an opportunity because of that. And then the bids don't come quite as early for a couple of these players that might have otherwise been expected. So it allows them some flexibility to jump back in and do that. So we saw some trades. We saw some clubs move up the board, eyeing certain players. The Collingwood one, that move to get up and grab Arlo Draper was certainly a targeted one, we think, because they only moved up a couple of spots. So they must have done that in the belief that he wasn't quite going to be getting there to their pick. And that was a club that I think the Pies have come out really well out of this tonight. They've taken some players who, if not for some injuries and setbacks, would have been right up there a little bit earlier in the draft, but they managed to capitalise on those issues that different players have had across the year and grab some later picks and be some good options.
Well, I'm happy to say that the 2021 NAB AFL Draft is now complete. We are done and dusted. We will analyse it all on the other side of this, but there are so many wonderful stories that have come out of this year's draft class, none more so than 20-year-old Lek Alir, of course, from the Central Districts, from Combine record breaker to Giant. Let's hear his story.
To get drafted would make my dream become a reality. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I don't know what I was going to say.
You're watching AFL.com.au and the AFL Live app. What an incredible 2 nights we have had at the 2021 NAB AFL Draft. It's all been happening and we're here to recap everything as it happened right now. Cal Toomey is pumped. He's jumped up. He's over at the plasma again. Cal Toomey.
I love this plasma.
Let's take a look. This was the first round. This was last night.
This is his phantom draft. This is
very funny. Remind us, 12 from 12, the Dirty Dozen. You got it done. Round 1. Jason Horne-Francis, the #1 draft pick. Sam Darcy, Finn Callahan, Nick Dacos, Mac Andrew, Josh Shelley, and then Josh Ward. That was the pick we were all hanging on to.
We were here last night waiting to see what the Hawks would do at that pick. They were weighing up a couple of options, Ben Hobbs and also Matt Johnson at that pick. In the end, they went with Josh Ward, who was the right call, I think, in the end. Now, the Dockers, they were big winners. They had to be. They had to nail this draft on the back of Adam Cerra leaving, and I think they did. Jai Amos, Neil Erasmus, local lads, they come through. A couple of surprises in the back end of the first round who we've spoken about. Lek Alir, who we just spoke about, his journey on the show. Amazing story as an intercept defender for the Giants. Angus Sheldrick here surprised a few as well, an inside midfielder who come on as a bit of a bolter in the second half of the season. So that left, though, some players hanging over to the second night because overnight there's been a stack of calls, there's been a stack of conversations about potential pick swaps. Basically, all the storyline was about Matt Johnson now.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we obviously felt for him last night when he was left hanging essentially, and a lot of talk about whether Fremantle would hold on to that pick, stick with the local flavour. They obviously took Amos and Erasmus, and then they decided, why not? We'll just take the WA trio, and they went with Matt Johnson.
I think it's ended up a really good result because they had a super position to be in. They could stay or they could take a bit of a deal and slide back and risk not having him there. In the end, they grabbed the 192-centimetre midfielder. He really complements what they've got, and he brings some more class to their group as well. He and Neil Erasmus, as a duo, are very good to bounce off each other. So looking forward to seeing them play for the Dockers and in purple for the next decade. Josh Goda, big North fan, gets to the Roos. That's a great story. This is where the Geelong Footy Club started its run of Geelong products. Toby Conway, back-to-back with Mitch Nevitt, the midfield option there. The Tigers had 3 picks in a row. They went with Tyler Sonsie, who we thought they had some interest in at 15, which they did, but otherwise they went with Tom Brown. They pick up Sonsie, Sam Banks, a halfback/wingman, and Judson Clark, a spicy small forward who can go through the midfield. Then some options here. We see a bid come through. Michito Owens finally had arrived at number 33 from the Swans. The Saints very, very happy to match it at that point. So the next generation academy player becomes a Saint. A couple of good options here, though. We saw Rhett Bazzo, the Eagles, go for a taller local option for them, a key defender/forward. And I don't think there'll be many clubs leaving tonight quite as happy as the Demons that Blake Howes got through, Riley, because they were considering him last night.
Talk to us about the Hawks, because a lot of people thought they'd trade up potentially for Matt Johnson.
Yeah.
They end up with two pretty good players, though, to complement what they did last night, bringing in Josh Ward. They get another really good midfielder in Connor McDonald, who's a balanced player, but they also bring in Sam Butler, who is one of the best small forward prospects of this year's draft.
He is, and I like the small forward aspect that he's not just a small forward goal kicker, which obviously is great, but it's the pressure stuff that he does as well. That sometimes can be not that fashionable, particularly at bottom age level or junior level. It's sometimes all about me. He is a player who helps out his teammates with his forward pressure and inside forward 50 tackling. So Sam Butler, the younger brother of Dan Butler, not as electrifyingly quick as Dan, who's at the Saints now, but I think at the same stage of their development, Sam's probably a more rounded player, so he might play some midfield time. Some other good stories, Paul Curtis, who we know has overcome his COVID-19 battle more recently and gets to the Roos to add a little bit of excitement to their forward line too.
And that was when the trades started happening. We'd
Yes.
been waiting all night for those to happen. So we had a couple of trades at the end of the second round, and then we moved into the third round, and it all kicked off with, we love a sibling story, don't we? And Corey Warner obviously picked up by the Sydney Swans, which is just a lovely story.
It is. He joins his brother Chad there. They'd shown the most interest in him. Very similar traits in a lot of ways. A little bit of power through the midfield, an explosive streak, able to get away, has some good running capacity too. So Corey Warner joins brother Chad at that spot there in Sydney. Josh Fahey, the bid finally come from the Bulldogs. We love this little piece of fun from the Bulldogs.
Revenge.
I don't think they were wrapped that they had to match the bid at pick 2 for Sam Darcy. They got to pick back 40 onwards to match that bid for Josh Fahey. He becomes a Giant officially. Arlo Draper, this was an interesting one, guys, because the Pies were a couple of spots back. They traded picks with the Cats to jump up and get ahead, clearly of the Bombers, to grab Arlo Draper, who slid down the order a little bit further than I thought he probably would, but I think there's talent there to work with, and I'm excited to see how he goes at the Magpies.
Is he the steal of this year's draft?
He could be. He could be. There's a couple in this group, though. I think Zach Taylor is another potential steal. Marcus Windhager gets his body right, could be a bit of a steal too. Of course, a member of the Next Generation Academy there. Cooper Murley, injuries have stopped him from probably being as productive this season as he would have set out to be, but there's no doubt that he as a prospect has talent. And Garrett McDonough, he was the shock of the night. The player out of the VFL program at Richmond joins the Bombers to add some more speed and run to their mix. So one to keep an eye on, Garrett McDonough. He's a storyline, no doubt.
And then we move on to the fourth round, and Jai Sarong. This was an interesting selection because we feel like Fremantle had some interest in the younger brother of Caleb Sarong, who's obviously on their list at the moment. But the Hawks had the pick before and they pounced.
Yeah, they certainly did, didn't they? And we're starting to enter father-son city as well. But Jai Sarong, a key forward option, very different player to Caleb, 193 centimetres as a key forward there out of the Gippsland Power program. Hugh Jackson, the Power had their eyes on him, and Dante Vicentini, they ended up using that pick to grab a tall option there to bolster their ruck department. Jack Williams becomes an Eagle, a good pickup for them, probably available a little bit later than was maybe on the cards mid-season, but gets through, kicked 40 goals this year, a productive key forward who could be a bit of a steal at that point. Then we love the romance of these picks. Jackson Archer becomes a Roo. Jace Berglund becomes a power player. And some really good stories here. Luke Cleary, overlooked last year. Yeah. Unlucky. Brilliant. Didn't have a year to perform for the Sandringham Dragons. Gets his chance this year, gets picked up by the Dogs. Greg Clark gets overlooked for 6 years. So that's an amazing story of resilience, and it's a good story again for the boys who are out there watching tonight, wondering where their chance could come. Well, you just got to keep going if you want it. And then the last pick, or one of the last picks, was a second chance.
And another good story in Charlie Constable.
Absolutely. Unique story, delisted by Geelong after several years at that club, had been up for grabs from a trade perspective, and eventually finds a new home at the Suns after moving in for that spot that was opened up from Hugh Greenwood. And then the final two spots. Cooper White, a flashy midfield option from the Geelong Falcons, joins the Cats. And the final pick of the night was Taj Wowoda, number 65, the father-son at the Melbourne Footy Club. The father-son duo, of course. Shane, his father, the 2000 Brownlow medalist, and Taj, a young midfielder on the rise too. So all 65 picks there. A couple more than most clubs would have expected in the end, and I think that's a good result for the pool overall.
Now, there are never any losers on draft night. We're all winners. Every club is a winner, but I want from each of you the club that you think did the best.
I think Fremantle did the best. I think the way they navigated their way through that opening 20 spots and ended up taking Jai Amos to fulfil a key forward need. They get Neil Erasmus to build on a midfield group that's already pretty exciting, and he'll be able to play some senior footy straight away next year and will be determined to do that. And then there's also Matt Johnson, who they had the offers for, but I think in the end wouldn't have been that far off their pick 8 anyway, which became pick 10. So they were able to get him with that first pick on the second day. And then they pick up Eric Benning late as a next generation academy player. So I think they were one of the winners. They had to be, because they had these early picks and they're important to nail the top 10 picks. But we wait and see how they go, of course. But there's no doubt that I think they selected really well.
Riles, what about from your perspective?
Really like what Brisbane was able to do throughout this draft. I mean, they obviously had 2 first-round picks, so they were in a position where they could win the draft. But I think when you've got 2 later first-round picks, you're never really sure what's going to come about. They managed to get Darcy Wilmot with their first one. I love him. He's an attacking halfback who can defend really nicely as well. Then they bring in Kai Lohmann with the last pick of the first round of the draft. Spoke to a number of clubs today that said they thought Kai Lohmann was one of the steals of the first round. They said if they had picks in that sort of 15 to 20 range, even a bit higher, maybe in the 10 to 15 range, he would have been right in their mix. Ultimately, they didn't have those picks, so he gets through to Brisbane at 20. They managed to bring in a defender, a forward, and then James Tunstall later in the draft with their third and final pick, a big-bodied midfielder who can come straight into that side as well. So strengthened all 3 lines with their 3 picks, so I like what they were able to do to a side that's still in the premiership window. So whereas Fremantle might be challenging from a bit further back, trying to make it into the 8, the Lions are challenging from the top 4. They've got to get players into the side that can improve them straight away in 2021. And I think particularly in Darcy Wilmot and Kai Lohmann, they've got 2 players that can do that.
And it's not over, because tomorrow we have, of course, the rookie draft and the pre-season draft. Tell us a little bit about that, Riley. It's you and Cal right here on afl.com.au and the AFL Live app.
Yes, it is around 3 p.m. We'll be going through every pick from the pre-season draft, which will happen first. Then the NAB AFL rookie draft. Keep an eye on a couple of names that might have missed out on selection over the last couple of nights. Then some names that we're all familiar with. The types that have been told by clubs that have been delisted but re-rookied, they'll come onto lists. Might even be a couple of surprises, some players that got delisted by a club that might find a new home elsewhere. It's why we love the rookie draft. Cal said a couple of times tonight, I'm not sure there's going to be too many picks.
Yep.
I'll have to see how it plays out.
All right, that is it from